Okay, everybody. I think we're about going. I just want to get my bearings here, folks. I'm live with Bosco from Saints and Scholars tonight. This is kind of a bit of an impromptu stream. I hadn't really planned on doing it, and everything's a little bit different. We're having a few gremlins, but basically, I think we're doing pretty well. So I'd like to welcome Bosco to the stream.
Thanks, Don.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. Tonight we're going to talk about the obvious big news story that's going on the last week, which is these fuels protests. I just have to make sure all these streams are up running. They seem to be. Audio looks good, I think. Yeah, we're there. Okay, so tonight we are on. We're streaming from Rumble, so the links are all on my X and Telegram feed. We're on YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, and X. And you're very welcome to join us. If you want to take part in any of the discussions or drop in a few comments, you can just do so on all of those platforms. We don't take super chats or anything, but you can just leave a comment. And you can do the same thing on X. I think there's a chat function on X that you can use as well. So let's get talking about it, basically. So you're you contacted me there yesterday, Bosco, and you're kind of interested. You did an article, actually. I forgot to mention before it went on. Bosco has an article out on Substack all about the kind of legal significance of all of this, the Garda response. You're kind of more interested in the response personally, aren't you?
Yeah, I for a long while actually. I mean, ever since I guess the Gardaí have changed their methodology with regards to protesting, which seems to have emerged um, a couple of decades ago with regards to certain other. I can't remember when they brought in a lot of the new measures and the public order unit, but ultimately, I would imagine a lot of these measures were brought in after that Labour minister, what's her name, who said that she was falsely imprisoned in the car.
Oh yeah, Burton, John Burton.
That's right,
Yeah.
yeah. And I've been interested in this because we've definitely seen a difference in policing in the country over the last decade, at least. Um, I wrote that article really to highlight the fact that there is an element in the state that think they're untouchable legally. By that, what I mean is that it seems to me now, because there is a dominance in the culture, even the media, and I know there was an article published by Gript recently, it could have been even today,
Mm.
whereby the National Union of Journalists condemned the minister, uh, the media minister, Patrick O'Donovan, who called for a review of fuel protest coverage.
Yeah.
And apparently, the NUJ were very upset that O'Donovan had asked the Commission
Man.
the man to investigate whether there was bias with regards to the reportage, which I find fairly ironic given the way that the Irish media are overwhelmingly left liberal, and we know that from research that was conducted only a couple of years ago. From
Yeah, I actually have that article there from the NUJ website pulled up, and it's called NUJ. If anyone wants to look at this, the NUJ alarmed at sinister comments by media minister on
That's right.
coverage of oil protests. Now, that's unprecedented, in my opinion. The fact that the NUJ, 'cause the NUJ, if anyone doesn't know, the NUJ are very left wing and liberal, broadly speaking. And that would be the bias, kind of, so to speak, of the media generally, but definitely of the union, the NUJ, which is a British union. But that is the union that most Irish journalists are a part of, and they are the union that has the standards. They have a standards document, which is considered like the standard that every journalist is supposed to cover any incident or any kind of um, journal any story, basically, uh, around like language, how you describe certain things, events and whatever. So the fact that the NUJ feels so using the term sinister on their own website.
That's right.
That, I think that's remarkable.
Very remarkable. And kind of, I noticed as well that there was a previous article written by the Irish Times in February, the 19th of February, and it commented, or the, who was it here, the journalist, Conor Lally, who is the security and crime editor of the Irish Times, spoke or wrote about the behaviour of the Gardaí with regards to pro-Palestinian marches. Now, I would find it very interesting if Lally will do the same for the protests that happened during the fuel protests. We know that I've never seen any articles referring to the heavy-handedness when it came to any of the IPAS centres, whatever like that. Again, it highlights for me that if the Gardaí come down heavy upon a certain cadre in this country, the Irish Times and the media are out there whistle or blowing their whistles and waving their flags to bring attention. I mean, in this article, apparently it looked towards the UN High Office Commissioner for Human Rights, Romero and Edwards, who had written a report condemning the behaviour of the Gardaí with regards to the pro-Palestinian protests and the use of pepper spray. But we've seen this liberally applied to protests across the board, but we don't see the same kind of scrutiny with regards to certain protests if they're not in accordance with the media ideology or the hegemony of the media.
Yeah. And if you think about the Commission Numan, like it's basically the same kind of organization as Ofcom in Britain, and it has, which is a Blairite construction. But the fact that even that institution, which they are using against people online, they're attempting to use Commission Numan to basically censor the internet, to basically come after people, citizen journalists and things like that. And it really showed, like, because they're paying the media like significant sums of money annually. When you actually, I've seen breakdowns. I haven't got them pulled up here, but there's breakdowns are available of what they actually pay these media organizations.
Yeah.
And it speaks to a kind of an attitude and a sense of like what the relationship. There's an expectation on behalf of the state that the media is basically there to work for it, and that's what we've seen since the kind of the pandemic era in particular. When they got into a very cozy relationship with the state, and this kind of is a very unhealthy situation. And I suppose it goes back to the funding model of media. And I mean, look, every newspaper you can think of basically was at some point was part of some political organization or representative or of the opinion of some block of political opinion. So
That's
there's no
right.
such thing as an unbiased media. We've kind of hit on these ideas before.
Yeah.
The idea of having no bias. It's not possible. Everyone has some kind of bias. You have to look at the world through some kind of frame. You can't
That's
cover
right.
every opinion,
Yeah.
every strand of idea or viewpoint. But you can make an effort to kind of include different viewpoints. And that's how I would say that's how we should be. So all this far right stuff, these kinds of weaponized narratives are really sinister, quite frankly. To use his word, they're sinister. And it's a shame that the NUJ wouldn't kind of see it from that perspective, demonizing people who are worried about their future, which is what I've seen. A lot of the online coverage of this has been pretty
It's been pretty
malicious.
dreadful, to be honest, and malicious. I mean, you've got newspapers there, headlines poisoning the well with regard to some of the protesters, especially those who were leading the protest. And the reality is, they never challenged the arguments themselves. They poisoned the well to discredit individuals. Now, that is not honest reportage. And if you look here, I have information here with regards to the political leaning of the press in Ireland, and it said here that there's research from 2024 and 2025 confirms that a significant and growing trend with regards to political leanings of the Irish media. And According to this information, approximately 61% of the journalists lean left. But in a way, that too is kind of misleading because remember, the media present the Fianna Fáil Fine Gael coalition as right and centrist. I mean, it's almost laughable.
Yeah.
The Overton window has moved so much that you can have a government that is effectively, let's be honest, engaging in a soft totalitarianism and that is promoting every far left agenda socially, undermining sovereignty, and they'll call it, they'll label it centre right. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. So I imagine the 61% of the journalists mentioned in that report are actually far left.
Yeah.
So I think there's no way um, you can navigate uh, political discourse in Ireland with that much bias in the media. It's impossible,
Yeah.
and I find that alarming. Um, what it does as well, as you said earlier on, Don, what it does is it creates this it augments the division. It presupposes that if you dissent against the government, you're automatically labelled far right
Mhm.
without any evidence or any definition of what they even mean by far right. And they use that because ultimately it's like a hasty generalization. We'll use this kind of a, what do they call it? This feminism, I think it's called. Let me see my pronunciation if I have it right. I'm terrible at. It's a form anyway of poisoning the well, where you use these kind of nomenclature that is very negative
Yeah, I would
without
call it
doing
weaponized language. Like it's like
exactly.
psychological. It's basically how I view the entire kind of what we call censorship or this kind of politicized language. This is basically psychological warfare. I
Of
mean,
course it
if you
is.
look at where this is coming from, like this kind of far right stuff. I mean, for example, there was an article put out this week by the Institute of Strategic Dialogue, and a lot of people picked up, they're because they're aware of the ISD. And the ISD is a think tank that was created by a wealthy Zionist, basically, in 2006, and it was related to. It had two main targets, which were very much of that era and our era. One was Islamism, and the other was this far right stuff,
Mm,
the far right, extreme right. And if you look at that institute, and institutes like that, these institutes spring up and they're all basically connected to NATO. They're connected to the Anglo. That one is based in London. It's got an offshoot in the US, but that's one of the bigger ones. And what they do is they basically create weaponized narratives. This is a form of warfare that we are subjected to, and that's how you have to understand this. And until people have that kind of consciousness about what they're living in, what society you're living in, and I've an article coming out. I keep saying this every month that I do a stream. I keep saying this article is coming out. I'm telling you, but it is coming out. It's just that it's just taking so the research
yeah.
is so involved, like in and editing, and it's just absolute, But it will deal with some of this, the earlier stages of this, and where this way of thinking kind of developed out of in the 20th century. But that's what it is. It's psychological warfare. And that's what, because that's, see, people going about psyops, everything's a psyop. This is a psyop. That's a psyop. A real psychological operation is actually controlling language and making language basically do what people in managerial positions or influential positions in society wanted to do and wanted to achieve. So this far right stuff and this kind of like it was very obvious in 2016. After 2016, you had Brexit and you had the original Trump kind of populism.
Yes.
And what happened was there was a backlash. And the backlash consisted of institutions like the ISD, other new ones, basically, were created out of thin air. And if you look trace, several of them popped up, within a couple of months. And it's connected to things like the Atlantic Council. And all of a sudden, Russia was rigging the elections. All of a sudden, Russia is controlling the opinions of the populace. It's not that they're reacting to their environment and what they're experiencing every day. No, it's that some Russian has Putin and the Kremlin have
Mm,
control over the narratives. And it's like, no, well, actually, you have control over the
that's
narratives.
right. That's
This is
right.
the point of this, that it's taking your perception and saying, no, actually, it's the inverse of what is more likely.
But it's even more insidious than that in a way, Don, because I often liken it this way. If you're in a cage and you know it's a cage, at least you can say, listen, I'm in a cage. But if you think, right, that your cage isn't a cage and everything is fine, that's far more insidious. And that's why soft totalitarianism really is far worse than the jackboot. Because, and I've said it to a mutual friend, that you can have a foreign army, walking down the Champs Elysees, and you can have Frenchmen crying, saying that we've been invaded. At least that's in your face. The problem now is that, and Stephen Lukes, and I know I've mentioned him before, and I know he's a leftist, but I've looked into some of his research, and you can apply it. And he spoke of power in three different phases. You've got the first dimension, which is about kind of overt power. The second, which is agenda setting. And the third one, again, is the most nefarious because it's about shaping consciousness. And if you don't think you're invaded, right, if you're in a cage and you think the cage is normal, well, then you don't even see the threat. And if you look at all the different mechanisms through the various agents of socialization in this country, from education, even the media, I mean, the slogans the media put out to describe themselves are farcical. You know, they'll call themselves kind of truth seekers and objective, sources of objectivity. And, the Irish Times is a paper of record. RT member put out an advert a couple of years ago about truth matters, and it was all this about targeting fake news. But sure, they're probably one of the biggest disseminators of fake news there is in the country. The Irish Times is the same. One of the Irish Times slogans I see here was "free from bias." Absolute garbage. It's absolute nonsense. It's And you see, the thing is, they've been crafty because if you've got hitherto trusted institutions, um, if they ever were, to be honest, I'm starting to wonder about that, but just say, bear with me, if they were hitherto trusted and you've got people who say, well, sure, RT were there since I was growing up, sure, they never told them, well, you're going to believe it, you're going to defer your trust, your critical faculties to them. And that's why Dietrich Bonhoeffer conceived his theory of stupidity. It's not that people are stupid per se. In fact, some people are very intelligent, but they defer their critical faculties to ideology and ideology makers, and their their own ideology and their identity becomes so fused that if you challenge one, well, the other one, well, especially the ideology, if you challenge the ideology, that means you challenge their very identity. That's why a lot of people react emotionally. And I don't know, I was listening as well to a guy, Chase Hughes. He does body language, and I think he worked for the intelligence services in America. I thought he made a very good point. He said, really, the way to try and dismantle, kind of to jog people out of this kind of almost cultic behavior, is not necessarily to prove them wrong, but to make them feel safe while they're being proven wrong. Because a lot of this is kind of ego dystonic, where they feel their ego's attacked. And that's why they react so viscerally. And I think the media play a monumental role in this. They're like the propagandists who are, the far right, this far right myth. We're all, Nazis and whatever.
But
And
even if that was the case, I mean, you still have to engage with what they're saying. You can't just pretend like that. Like, this is a way of dismissing someone, basically, and it's actually a class-based argument.
oh yeah,
This is all. I mean, if you look at the reactions here by certain quarters to this, like, I looked at this week, like, and it's really after crystallizing basically where the majority of people who consider themselves left wing actually are. Like,
mm,
they are basically just liberals. I've done all these posts during the week. I've posted more than ever this week, weirdly. But it's just amazing stuff is going on when you look at what they're saying. Like vicious class hatred, basically, coming from academic economists in institutions, coming from professional journalists,
That's right.
so called, coming from professional left wing activists. I mean, the standouts. I give Paul Murphy credit. He tried to have a reasonable position on it. Sinn Féin kind of jumped on the bandwagon a bit, and they're kind of trying to get ahead of it. At least they're trying, and but mainly the like Labour, Social Democrats, totally and out of the picture, and Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael are just on the attack, and there's all this talk about backbenchers or in uproar and all the rest of it. But that kind of shite gets put out all the time by PR people anyway. That doesn't mean anything. Like if you're still allowing your party to be led by people like this, well, what good are you? But what it shows is that there is an absolutely monumental divide in this country between people who have to work with diesel and know what a lorry costs to keep on the road every week and
That's
know
right.
what like this is not like it's a kind of a luxury kind of bubble centered predominantly around a few well-off affluent kind of addresses in Dublin
That's
who
right.
seem to think that because they have this FDI money machine that they've
Mm.
built for the last 30 or 40 years, that nothing else seems to matter,
Well,
that
that's why I
they're
kind of
immune,
frame this as well in kind of reputational capital, because I've kind of dubbed them the sophistico, because they believe themselves to be kind of a class above everybody else in their head, and it's not just against working class, but it's against rural people as well,
Yeah.
and it's a select group of individuals who pay no personal costs for any of their own opinions. And I think, was it Rob Henderson, a sociologist, spoke of luxury beliefs, because these people can have these luxury beliefs, but the thing is, once it hits home, suddenly they start to get nervous. And in a way, Graham Linehan is a great example of that. And I've been saying it for a while, is that a lot of people only change their tune when they're personally affected. Up till then, Graham Linehan was a pure kind of globalist liberal. I think he still is, personally.
Mm-hmm.
And I even saw it. We're probably going to pivot a small bit here, but we can pivot back. But what did you think of the fuel protests themselves? I have a bit of an issue with regard to some of the commentary within the protests where they were saying this is just about fuel, and they were denouncing people who are making it broader. Now, as far as I'm concerned, this should be the straw that breaks the camel's back. It has everything to do with everything that went beforehand. And I would
Yeah.
imagine that a lot of people who are angry uh, at the moment on the fuel protests, I think, to be fair, and I hope I am being fair, I think many of them would have denounced previous protests by people campaigning against the loss of sovereignty in the country. And I've heard voices saying, "Oh, we don't want anything to do with politics." This is politics. Any statement about civil life is political, and I think to reduce it just to getting a few pence just compounds for me the level of greed, really, that is a motivating factor for a lot of people in this country. What's your own take on it?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like, I've seen those clips as well. There was the Shinners were going after the National Party, although they
That's
didn't
right.
really. I mean, the Shinners they actually got kicked out of it themselves, actually. But like, this speaks to there is a kind of a people have picked up on this. There is this like danger that it's a kind of a May Fein type thing
Mhm.
where these guys are just single issue. All they want to do is basically get some rebate on fuel or whatever. But I would tell people my opinion, my view is that most people are actually apolitical. Like when you
Mhm.
when you're on X or somewhere and you're arguing with someone, like that's not like most people. Most people
Mhm.
are not like that. Most
Mhm.
people don't really have very well formed opinions about politics. And mainly, and I'll be honest about it, they're perfectly entitled to be like that because they're just busy with other things.
Mhm.
Like we put a lot of effort into thinking about politics and coming up with ideas and trying to understand different ideas and investigating things and writing articles and stuff. But like most people don't engage with politics like that. So they are actually basically kind of at sea. And that's why it's important that the right politics basically gets kind of brought to them. And I said this on X there during the week. I pointed out basically that what actually could be powerful about this is that if the fuels protest and the kind of nationalists and everything kind of come together, as was seen in Dublin and
Mm,
in Galway,
mm,
um, that actually is terrifying for the establishment, because the last thing you need, because to basically to be successful in politics, you need a kind of a coalition, because you're never going to get everyone to agree on absolutely
yeah,
everything that you're about at all times. But
yeah.
if you do gain some modicum of influence, you can pursue what you want to pursue, ideally.
Mm,
So the government will be very fearful of that. The idea that um, people would get together basically and have common cause and start to form because what you see there is that there actually is a coherent enough kind of group, a rural urban alliance
mm,
of kind of normal sort. Like it was in Dublin, it was like normal Dubs basically came out with flags and all, and they were kind of
mm,
meeting up with the lorry drivers and the farmers, and they were basically kind of finding common cause.
mm,
That's really scary for the establishment,
mm,
because you now have this potential a coalition that's separate, that you, because what they love to do is they love to pick out these rural, you know, gombines and elevate them, the Healy Rays. That's how they're so
mm,
powerful. They're these kingmakers within the system, for
yeah.
their little patch of turf or whatever. But if you look at it, what the establishment would be most fearful of is if this urban coalition, urban rural coalition gets formed, that would totally annihilate the Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael kind of bedrock that they always can rely on. And they've always been able to rely on these rural populations just to kind of go along, keep the politics local, and not really worry about the bigger picture. Because there's EU subsidies and there's this, that, and the other. But now we're seeing that, well, this kind of stuff, like, it isn't as effective anymore at kind of sheltering the country from economic globalization. So populism was the reaction to economic globalization, basically,
Yeah.
in recent years, that sprung up in the last decade. And this is kind of like agrarian revolt, you
Mm,
know. This isn't, but it's not just, people are wrong to make it just about farmers either. It's not just about farmers. I mean, from what I've seen of the and I know several people who are on the protests, and most of these people are actually just contractors, or they are people who have a lorry and they drive for a living. Maybe they have a lorry, maybe they have two lorries, and they employ another person, but they work basically with the lorry themselves. That's the kind of people who are going to be most affected by this,
I'll
by the
pose this question as well, though, Don, if you don't mind me asking, and that is kind of maybe a ignorance amongst people like myself and other people who are not farmers. Now, we have a good friend on our channel who's a farmer, and he's put us right on many aspects, including the rise in costs in fertilizer and the availability of fertilizer and stuff. I think there's this kind of mythology that every farmer is exceptionally wealthy.
yeah. Yeah, I've seen this actually a lot on the left this week. That's a
Mm,
great point you bring up, because what I've seen is that you have these kind of college educated, like, Marxists, or kind of pseudo Marxists. I don't know if they really are, like, they kind of use Marxist language, to put it that way,
yeah,
and they love to go on about, oh, these are petty bourgeois. These are the buzzwords they're throwing around. Like,
yeah,
like baby's first Marxist,
yeah,
language book or something, like petty bourgeois, and they're speaking about farmers as if they had a big house, 5,000 acres in West Kerry, and a house in London with, three maids or whatever, like you, like you're
new
speaking.
aristocracy. Yeah,
Yeah, like, and it speaks to the kind of shit that they're being radicalized with as well. Like, these people are obviously not actually interfacing with society as it actually is structured. They're not actually they don't actually know urban society and rural society, and the kind of the economics of agriculture, or the reality of social life in rural area. A lot of them claim to be. I grew up in a rural area, but I don't know. Like, a lot of them, they don't seem to know very much, because like, simply growing up in a rural area doesn't mean you know anything about farming.
yes.
But the truth is that, like, the the class kind of thing here, like, they're completely misapplying, like, these categories in the modern era, and they're trying to apply a 19th century framework to 21st century agriculture, where agriculture in Ireland has been revolutionized by technology and scale.
Mm,
And farmers, and just like everyone who's in small business, basically, is on tiny margins. Anyone in the retail sector, like in the 80s and all, people made a decent living owning a shop.
Yeah.
A lot of them were able to send their children to college and have a good life just by owning a small shop in a town or a village in this country. But even that part of the economy is gone as well with globalization. That has been destroyed because now you basically you're kind of with Amazon, with internet shopping, with the profit margins have come down, with supermarkets driving down the costs, the prices rather of like basic goods. That's why like vegetable growing has kind of ceased to be a thing in Ireland.
But is
And
that not dangerous though, Don? Because
it,
we were discussing off air there, or before we came live, that very rarely do people talk about food security. And I think, in a way, what has happened with the Iran American Israel war is that it's highlighted that, for a start, we're an island. And secondly, we've outsourced so much. I mean, you've got the Mercosur agreement,
yeah,
where effectively that's going to put more, um, it's going to undermine agriculture even more so.
absolutely.
And
The IFA agreed with all this. You know what I mean? The IFA have only put on a show at the
but are
end.
the IFA just like, in a way, the what you call it, the union executives? Because
Yeah,
there's this again. We tend to generalize, and we tend to kind of associate through movies, kind of, or Jim Larkin as the trade unionist. But a lot of trade unionists now are kind of executives. They're far removed from what they were intended to be. I would imagine the IFA are the same, are they?
oh, absolutely. I mean, most farmers hate the IFA. If you talk
Yeah.
to any farmer about the IFA, they're not fans at all. Many
Mm.
people like stop paying their dues to them, like because they actually take a cut out of every piece of
Yeah.
every cow that's sold in a factory that they take a cut of. They have all these sources of income basically.
Yeah.
And so the IFA, if you I remember, there was an article there came out a story broke there years ago about the head of the IFA was getting something like $250,000 or more even a year.
That's
Just back
unbelievable. I mean,
five
yeah,
five
trade
grand.
unionists are the same. They're so
Yeah.
removed now from their base and what they're
And
called. They can be easily compromised.
this is the reason. I mean, Fianna Fax, for example, he was doing a series of good threads there this week about this very thing, like, and he was pointing out that because he's looking at the whole stakeholder system,
Yeah.
which you create these representatives, basically these representative bodies, and what you do is you basically they're looked after really well, and
Mm,
basically you get them on side. They get used to coming to the meetings, being on
mm,
boards, hobnobbing. They move around between boards a lot of the time. And the construction industry is the same. If you look at the construction industry, most people in the construction industry have no union representation.
mm,
We're at a point now in the construction industry where, like, most young fellas now will not have the opportunity to even get an apprenticeship because of the way the economics of it all work. Like, is that you have all these large companies and they just get people to subcontract to them, so you don't have like as much apprenticeship opportunities, which is exactly the worst thing you could do when you've got a shortage of workers in that area. So there's so many levels, to the problem. Like you're saying, it's not just a single multifaceted thing that the farmers and the lorries and these guys who are using huge amounts of diesel for their businesses. It's not just about the diesel. It's about Mercosur. It's about the effects of globalization. We're going to offshore
yeah.
the farming basically to Brazil. We're going to talk about green and the environment, and we're going to buy in basically beef which is farmed in South America
Mm,
on rainforest land, and we're going to actually bring that in. It doesn't get any of the certifications. Like, there's so many costs in farming alone. If you look at,
mm,
like, farmers have to get all these tests done every year. It costs thousands every time to do it, basically. And a lot of these tests are questionable if they're even necessary anymore. If you look at the construction industry, like, we have, like, huge standards have been created. But what they've done is they've made the price of housing actually more prohibitive. So
yeah.
you have to meet these incredibly high standards now to do a new build. And listen, no one's saying that's necessarily bad, but it adds to the cost. So we've made society in Ireland very expensive. So you have to have this very good income basically to afford to do basic things now. Whereas one time people kind of got by and a little bit more, like, and they were able to kind of, well, okay, we'll tighten our belts. We won't have a fancy house, but but this kind of living has been taken away from people through globalization. And
It's
there's
on
this
as well.
duality to it, like where there's now a very obvious divide between the people who are
Yeah.
closest to the FDI economy and the managerial state, and those people outside of it. You could say the urban working poor, and maybe the rural, agriculture, construction workers type people, like
Like, I read somewhere that, and you can contradict me here if I'm wrong, that the government are forecast to take in a record number of 106 billion euros in tax. And yeah, but at the same time, they're saying that they don't have money. They've actually made profit due to the, shall I say, the new Gulf War, shall we say. And we still have, is it up to 17,000 people homeless? We've got overcrowding in schools. Our hospitals are a joke. There's waiting lists. So, and of course, we keep hearing about international obligations. They seem to be a priority. To fund the Zelensky crime syndicate is a major priority, according to the Irish government and the Irish media. But, like, where do you think this money is going? I mean, I'm dumbfounded sometimes, to be honest.
yeah, like I haven't got anything prepared here, but in my view, from what I've kind of seen over the years and kind of investigated in my own way, um, our state spending, we know for a fact, we know that much has doubled in about a decade. And you could say some of that could be inflationary, maybe some,
Yeah,
the cost of things has just increased. So it's not a literal doubling necessarily in terms of value, but it is that the actual number has doubled. We know that much. And we also know that the Irish state, basically, since liberalisation began, um, the Irish state itself has expanded. So, in the bad old days, Ireland was a poor country. There's no doubt about that. Economically speaking, like Ireland was what was called a post-colonial
mm,
underdevelopment kind of economy, because the country was systematically underdeveloped for so long. It had this huge leap to make. So Ireland was comparable to, what you would call a third world or a developing economy, basically in the 50s and early 60s. And then with liberalization, um, you know, things did improve. Now the trouble is that or what well, some of it was necessary, I suppose, but the state started to grow as well in the 60s, and this is how we've ended up with this huge pensions problem in many respects. Is that we created so many kind of decent jobs, and in the government sector basically, and the government's involved in so many things that this has kind of created a massive problem. And how do you pay for all these pensions? How do you pay for all this stuff? And then you had benchmarking in the 90s, whereby the pay of people in the public and civil service basically was mapped on, especially these people at the top of these systems, is mapped onto like international corporation kind of levels. So you have the people sitting on boards in Ireland basically getting, like I say, a quarter of a million or something, you know what I mean, or a couple of hundred grand or whatever, and they're paid like the CEO of Apple. And in reality, like that, the state has to try and find ways of funding all this. So we've created this huge spending. Mac Williams was writing about it this week. David McWilliams was writing about it. He had an article in, I think it was the Times, or no, it was the Irish Times, I think. And he's talking all about this, like the spending bonanza and the sheer incompetence of this. And this is what's ramped up. So there's, it's not just one thing. It's just it's a cascading effect. And you see a similar thing in other countries. I mean, you have a similar pensions crisis slash public liabilities crisis in every Western country, basically, and it's driven by demographics because we have smaller families and people are living longer, and it just multiplies. And that is the kind of root of, I would say, the extreme globalization. Like, the Ireland has doubled down on this idea of like, well, because in the 90s, economic globalization was so beneficial to the economy, this is what we just keep have to doing, like. And so this class of people has kind of emerged now, like, that is very much, um they're younger, so they don't have the memories maybe like of the country the way it was before.
that's right.
And they're surrounded by, like, there's a class aspect to this, in that they are educated in to have certain attitudes cultured to have certain viewpoints. The progressive ethos has just totally pervaded Irish society. It's in managerial training. It's in the corporate culture. It's in the media. It's in the artistic world. There's specialist academics and specialist administrators. Like if you go to universities now, the administrators apparently, I'm told, are paid more than the bloody lecturers often. And you have all the arts institutions. They're all the people at the very top of that are trained, they're cultivated, and this has created like this attitude, a series of attitudes. There's this guy, I'm going to do a stream on him someday, called Richard Florida,
All right.
and he writes all about this thing called urban. What's it called? What did he call it? Creative cities, basically, and creative cities. This is all feeding into how Dublin and places like this are being developed, basically. And it's all this idea that there's a creative class, and they're progressive, and they're making society in their image, basically. And so this idea of having the streets free of cars, and having people living in high-rise buildings, and having a multicultural population, having LGBT embedded in the culture of the city. That is very deliberately being cultivated. That's not an accident.
Yeah.
That is something that is being cultivated in our city, in Dublin, and in European capital cities, generally speaking, so they like the diversity, and there's a set of attitudes that have come along with this, and it says that this is how any developed society should be. And so this class, this new administrative managerial class, thinks in this way. And so I'm using class analysis here. People may not like it, but class is a factor. We have to look at this is the administrative class. Like there are people who are making the policies and the development policies of our country, and they're in things like the Geary Institute of Economics and and they're in NESC, which is the Advisory Council, National Economic Advisory Council. There's there's all kinds of things, for the Arts Council. Like these people are in a network. A lot of them will be in common purpose. A lot of them will be network. They'll know each other, and there'll be relationships that you don't know because you're not in that network.
But is there not an elephant in the room as well, Don? I mean, and I say this to a lot of my friends, and I don't know, does it kind of land at all? But if you look at the last general election, and I think you are right, I think most people are apolitical. But that in itself is a problem, because if you look at the last general election, Fine Gael received 24.8% of first preference votes, Fianna Fáil 21.9%, Sinn Féin 19.1%, Social Democrats 6.2%, Labour Party 4.9%, Green Party 3.2%. I mean, you're talking there, 81% of the first preference votes cast were for effectively progressive parties.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a product of mass education in many respects.
Like, how many of the people during the fuel protests who are complaining about the price of fuel voted for any of these parties? I would imagine most of them did.
Well, they have to have had, I suppose, don't they? I mean,
yeah, and I know people say about kind of, the elections are rigged. And I say, hang on here. I'm not saying that they're not, and I'm not saying that that there's fairness across the board.
Yeah.
But I would always look to other markers.
Yeah, you don't need to go to rigging the election. I mean, you can rig the election by controlling the attitudes of the public.
Exactly. Even if you look at the GAA, you couldn't get more traditional than that, right? Look how they've become so woke. They even have changed their symbology to a large degree. It's very corporate now. Even I'm a Munster man, and the Munster hurling championship was a highlight of the year. But now it's this round robin. It's lost a bit of its kind of gloss. Even the hurling itself has become very kind of almost tippy-tappy. It's not as kind of organic as it used to be. Some people might say, because I'm from Cork and we're losing a lot, that I might be doing sour grapes. But
people will say the same thing about rugby, won't they? Like rugby used to be more fluid.
I mean, I've noticed an awful lot of people now say, "Oh, I love the rugby," but I think it's more to do with what does rugby represent? Rugby represents this kind of reputational, oh, the rugby club, kind of the,
Yeah.
you know, what kind of symbology does it kind of create in the mind of people when they cheer on Ireland, and there's
Yeah, I'll
certain
tell you,
prestigious
like,
schools and
I am like I have often thought about this thing, this rugby. I never talked about it before. I never had anyone bring it up, but like I have often thought like that. You think of like what could be a psyop. I think the like making the Irish rugby team this big meme, like it's almost it's almost a psyop in its own right in a way. Like because you think about it, it's like you don't have the national anthem, you have Ireland's Call. You know
that's
what I
right.
mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And the Ireland's Call is a very different song. Like you know what I mean?
Oh, without doubt. And there's
Very flat, very
compromises.
yeah.
Even
Mm.
the flag representing the Irish or rugby team is not the tricolour. Now I know people say, of course it's not. It's meant to represent the whole island, but ultimately, these are compromises that do get into people's consciousness.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know,
it has, and rugby has become the big thing, like, and it is. It kind of went along with the kind of tiger and all, like this is the affluent kind of sport, like this is the kind of the sport of the kind of upwardly mobile kind of people, like more
but it
so.
also kind of, I mean, it goes back
Yeah,
to the bread and circuses, really, doesn't it? Because I mean, ultimately, all these field sports, and listen, I like sports, I played sports, but ultimately, they're made up games for entertainment or fitness. But people almost kind of, you'll get more people who, like I was watching a film, Saipan, about the Roy Keane and Mick McCarthy episode. And when I look back, it was kind of bizarre because the whole country was, oh, what do we, Keane has left the, the training and, left the others, left the squad because he fell out with Mick McCarthy. And you're there kind of going, more people, I would argue, were probably invested in that than
yeah,
they are
that
in,
story just
in
never went. I mean, my God, it was unbelievable. Like it
that's
went
right.
on for. It felt like it went on for years in the media.
That's right.
There was a whole. Wasn't there a play created about it or
That's
something?
right. I Keen or something.
Yeah,
Yeah, like I
yeah.
Claudius. But it's like I love sports. As I said, I've been a fan. Now, as I've gotten older, I'm not so much of a fan, to be honest, because you're there, especially with, like, a lot of Irish people like the football or soccer they call it in America, but they I know guys who will name their kids, like I knew a guy who named his kid Trafford after Old Trafford. And you're kind of going, hang on here. This is a made up game. It's largely owned by billionaires, played by mercenaries who will earn huge money. And
Well,
then you've got clubs like Liverpool, who people will say, oh, Liverpool, it's a socialist club. And you're kind of going, how socialist is a club owned by billionaires, played by millionaire mercenaries, where you get jerseys manufactured in sweatshops and tickets are exorbitant? Like, can
yeah.
anybody tell me how
I mean,
that?
soccer is the ultimate for that. Like, I mean, that whole idea of the mercy. See, like if you think about sport, I could do a whole. I don't know how we get onto this, but it's very interesting. But soccer, like
Yeah,
like sport is simulated combat.
that's right.
Okay, so
Yeah,
when you think of a sporting match, like games like rugby and all, they were created at places like Eton and all, like and well, it was rugby college, wasn't it? But like, it comes out of that kind of like we're gonna get the kind of elites, like, and we're gonna toughen them up, and we're gonna teach them to kind of work as a team and have this kind of militarist kind of attitude and set of values, mercenary and like the soccer players, like you think about it, making soccer, like because that was the first game where in the 90s in particular, like it began to become so corporatized.
that's right.
And I remember that's when all the transfers drama started, like, and it's all like,
Mm.
oh, Roy Keane is going from whoever he was, Nottingham or someplace, to like Manchester, like, and this was a big transfer, wasn't it? Like, and so on. You had all these players like moving, like, and then every year there's a new record. This is the most valuable player. And then the games come out, like, and the games are all you're buying this player, buying that player, you're the manager, and it's like, and people now think of society this way, like, well, if we just get the best team in Ireland, then we'll be the best country. If we just get the most multicultural team, like sports creates the attitude in people's mind that you can just pick up the best players like from all over the place, and this will make a great country. Like where it doesn't kind of start from the kind of organic people themselves, like and say, what do we have to work with here? Like how can we develop our own people?
Well, I've kind of developed a bit of a meme with my friends because, like, the world, your country could be exploding, as in kind of social cohesion completely through the destroyed. You could be going through a financial meltdown personally, individually, and societally, and you'll still get guys going, "What about the transfer window?" Do you know what I mean? It's like you're there kind of going, people are living in cloud cuckoo land. Like there's guys there, adults, who are kind of going, why aren't Liverpool or Man United spending 100 million on such and such a player? And then the next minute they'll be going on about social justice. And you're kind of going, are these guys not aware at all of the kind of dissonance?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I
like,
never understood this soccer leftism. Like, I'm convinced that all this soccer leftism that you see was basically a project in the 80s, when they started making the league really multicultural and multiracial,
yeah,
and they started, and obviously no one wants to see players getting abused and all. There was the John Barnes thing and all, but like, there was a very deliberate thing to kind of do away with the kind of macho, kind of quite frankly racist soccer hooligan, and this is this Antifa thing, like you see every time you go to you're on X, like, and there's some guy with a soccer fucking emoji or soccer
that's right.
logo
Yeah,
on his avatar, you can be sure he's posting like some anti-fascist shite.
that's right.
You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
that's
And
right.
then it'll be the next thing. It'll be like Celtic, and
Well, Celtic are notorious. I mean, Celtic fans, because the very same Celtic fans today who are ultra left, ultra woke, uh, anti-Catholic, yet the very reason Celtic was established was to provide working class Catholic immigrants in from Ireland, Northern Ireland, invariably in Glasgow, an opportunity to socialise effectively. And I just find it bizarre. And I suppose some people might say, "Yeah, but lads, you've gone off the topic." But I actually think it's relevant because I think it goes back to your statement about kind of how people have become so apolitical. And you look at the fuel protests, and I think a lot of people got a major wake up call. Those who were in the protests themselves, who were pepper sprayed, battened, or treated, aggressively by the police or the Gardaí. Because I imagine a lot of them, when they were watching IPAS protests or anti-nationalist protests, they were probably on the side of the Gardaí and saying, "Yeah, go on, lads, go in and beat them up," or reading the newspapers and believing all the garbage about that. Oh, the big far right are a threat. And I think a lot of these people, I hope, have woken up to the fact that a lot of this is mythology driven by the media in order to dehumanize, but also to discredit genuine dissent. I mean, there was law emerging from Germany there, which is extremely worrying, that is it the Social Democrats or the principal party in power, where they're going to ensure that any kind of form of alienation of property uh, is conditioned upon having the right opinion. Now, I find that extraordinary. And of course, there's precedent during the truckers' um, strikes in Canada, where bank accounts were frozen. And I've heard actually of certain Irish protesters who believe their accounts were frozen.
Yeah.
So, I mean, people are going to have to wake up and say, listen, it's no longer comfortable to sit in the sidelines. You're going to have to get involved because it's going to come back. It's going to come home to roost at some stage for you.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, and like that Canadian who is the whatever role she has in on Garda Síochána, like she
Deputy
was
Commissioner, yeah.
deputy commissioner. Yeah, like she was literally the woman who was involved in that in Toronto. During those protests, like, and that was unprecedented. And you can really see that the way they have gone about this whole operation with the Gardaí, like it's very much in the same vein as that. Like they'll talk all about like, oh, we're here to community policing and reasonableness, but this is the government basically using the Gardaí to shield themselves from having to deal with the public. So you have this stakeholder system where these people are locked out of the stakeholder system. This is the first problem. Through things like the IFA, these institutions basically, they're part of the stakeholder process. And to be part of the stakeholder process, you have to tick all these boxes about, well, you have to be part of the sustainable development agenda. You have to be okay with all the people. There's a whole list of things basically that if you're not this, you don't get to be in the process. You won't get accredited, so to speak, to be
Yeah,
part of the process. And so these different, lorry drivers, like I know several of these people, lorry drivers, tradesmen. I know one tradesman that's involved in this. I know different guys who were agricultural contractors. These lads are not doing this. Like I've seen Peter Ryan was on, he was going mad about on the Economist guy from America, like Irish American, but he was going. He's taken this contrary line that, oh, this is all crazy and they don't know what they're doing, and it's like, you are speaking as a macroeconomist looking at like macroeconomic data and saying, well, what do these guys want? But you're assuming that the process is honest. The
mm,
process isn't allowing these men's voices to be heard. And the data that they have to give you, you're not actually getting. You're not seeing that, like, this lorry has not made money for a month because the price of the fuel has gone up so much that
that's
this
right.
lorry is not going to be economic anymore. Now,
Well, I
the
heard one bus driver said that was it the fuel for a month went from was it 8,000 to 12,000 or something, or
yeah,
something of that variety. I mean, again, I might have I'm not a bus driver, so that could be just completely
yeah.
exaggerated. But the point I suppose really is that people are feeling the punch, or the pinch rather, and there's a multiplier effect here as well, Don, because if one sector is starting to suffer, well, then that makes its way down to all sectors. It has to.
Yeah, of course. This is all going to be passed on. Like the people are going on about, oh, the taxes is not fair to pass on the cost of keeping the haulage, as if haulage and bus drivers, as if these people exist in a parallel universe that doesn't affect you. Like, who's
Yeah,
going to bring your children to school if the bus service is no longer viable for this
that's
company
right.
to operate? Like
Yeah,
that's what we're looking at happening here. Like this is
yeah,
the like I know in agriculture, for example, like because of the war in Iran that has obviously exploded this problem. Plastics have gone up like 15%. It's a roll of silage wrap. Farmers, you're adding thousands to the cost of doing silage, of doing any of these processes that need to get done every year. Like this is how fertilizer has gone up
actually, I'm
hugely.
glad you mentioned that. Can you clarify for us kind of dimwits with regards to who don't work on farms why the fertilizer issue is actually something that should be on everybody's mind?
Yeah, well, fertilizer is used. Like obviously, it's you need to fertilize crops, but basically, all that stuff is imported. Like, and because of the war in Iran, and before that, it was the war in Ukraine affected
Yeah,
all this, but as well, and of course, there's also the issue with the importers of all these products because the people who import them basically they do gouge people. Like,
yeah,
you ask farmers, like farmers will tell you like that they're getting gouged as soon as like so it's like with the diesel. As soon as the opportunity to put it up comes up, it's up,
mhm,
and it's not going to be brought down anytime soon. And so there's all this is going on, but the point is that all of these costs have to be passed on,
yeah,
or you have to go out of business.
mhm,
Now, it's okay for a macroeconomist to say, "Oh well, it's unviable. We can't be doing this. We can't be doing that." But the truth is that, well, if this part of the economy actually starts to, because I've seen already there's several companies that are going out of business, like,
mhm,
even
mhm.
this week, like people who've been on those protests, like this was their last roll of the dice. Like these people have tried to reach out to the structures of the state, and the state isn't interested because they're not a stakeholder, and they have no basic rights then within that system to
But I
have their
imagine as well, though,
heard.
Don, a lot of these kind of small holdings, whatever, barely survived COVID. I mean, that's a monumental shock to their financial system. This is going to be another major shock. How many are going to survive two major shocks within a decade, effectively?
Yeah, well, it's going to annihilate small businesses, like because the margins are tiny.
Yeah.
Fellas driving lorries and all, they don't have a big margin. Like this again, you see the Twitter Marxists, like, these are petty bourgeois people. Look at how much that tractor or that lorry is worth.
Yeah.
Like this is the most childish like thing I've ever seen. These people have no idea. They've never been in business. Like they've never
Mm.
had to actually provide a service for anyone. You know, like sitting in some fucking like apartment in Dublin, thinking that like a guy driving a lorry is some fucking robber baron. You know,
Is it a bit like, I mean, I'm going to use a crude analogy here. You can tell me now if it's not accurate, but just say if you go into uh, I don't know, maybe not a Michelin star restaurant, but a fairly upmarket restaurant, and you see beautiful furniture, you've got the chefs there, you've got the meal, you've got the produce, whatever, and the assumption is, oh, this is a great gig, but we also know that restaurants fold very easily because the mark or the margin, um, the profit margin is very low because you've got all these other costs. You've got liability costs, or you've got you have to pay salaries. You've got to probably pay rates. You've got produce. You've got advertising.
yeah.
And I suppose a lot of people don't see that with farming. They just see, just say,
They
an
think that
expense.
every farmer is like just collecting all these subsidies and they're just lying in bed all day. And it's
Yeah,
like the truth is that food is subsidized because basically the truth is that if you were to actually see what it would cost to buy beef for the family every week, like it'd probably be 3 or 4 times more expensive than it is now. Like,
yeah.
if you were paid the market rate,
Mm.
So the reality is that we're going to make all these things totally, everything's just going to be imported, so that's why they're bringing in all the Brazilian stuff and all, bringing all that in. And like we're just not going to do this in the economy, like from what I can see.
I'm
Look
old
at the
enough to
climate
remember
targets. The,
the
the climate
sugar.
targets demand that we basically get rid of half the herd, like.
Yeah. I'm old enough to remember the sugar beet, and of course, the sugar industry is completely decimated.
That's
I
gone.
mean,
Yeah,
like, again, because you're in it, and I apologize for asking these series of questions, but I'm genuinely interested. But we spoke earlier about kind of food security. I mean, if we're outsourcing, for example, fertilizer, which you would think which should be really produced in the country,
but see, it
but
has
as
to
a
come
lot
in.
of people,
You can't really like certain things just have to come in,
right?
like that stuff is coming out of South America and it's coming out
Mm,
of it's produced in Russia and like Belarusia. I think is where a lot of it comes out of. I think it used to anyway, and it's coming out of that place in Iran, like through that strait and everything.
yeah.
So like these chemicals have to be brought in, and there's all
Mm,
kinds of other things in industries that has to be brought in. It'll be sulfur or whatever it is, like
yes.
some material, like something that you're not really thinking of as a macroeconomist, like.
Yeah.
And well, hang on, if this stuff stops coming in, like, or
Mm,
quadruples in price, like I've seen it in the construction industry, like where a sheet of plywood went up, like like 50%, like overnight, like because of the Ukraine thing, like, do you know what I mean? Like
yeah.
you can't get certain things, like in hardwares, like this kind of stuff, like this is going to get this is going to get worse, and and it's like a lot of people will say, like, well, it's because of Iran, and it is partly hugely because of that, like, yeah. But if you don't react to this crisis, like in my opinion, this is an absolute emergency. What's going on? Because I know
Mm,
from speaking to these kinds of people my whole life, like these kinds of contractors and everything, like these guys understand their industry, like, and they are not political people. And people are criticizing them because they're not political people. It's like, oh, why haven't you got a manifesto? It's like, man, this guy is driving a fucking lorry 6 days a week. Like, he doesn't have time to write a political manifesto. You know,
yeah.
this person and the people like him have gotten together and attempted to speak to the state, and the state has told them to fuck off and put a boot on their throat.
Yeah.
And the result of this is that huge parts of the economy are probably are collapsing as we speak, basically, and this is going to produce an absolute fucking knock-on effect that's enormous. You'll have uh, prices will increase, services won't be available, and yeah, it's going to cost money to basically stop taxing fuel so much, and it's likely to go up even more. But if you don't do that, then not, and you're going to have to start finding savings in other places, and then they'll say, "But where are you going to find the savings, Don? Where are you going to find the savings?" Well, you're going to have to get fucking ruthless, aren't you? Like, because you've increased spending by 100% in 10 years, so you're going to have to start looking at cutting certain things. You're going to have to look at foreign aid very differently. You're going
Yeah.
to have to look at funding IPAS to the tune of a billion and 0.2 billion, 1.2 billion annually. this kind, and you're going to have to incrementally take shavings. You're going to have to reduce ministerial pay. You're going to have to reduce perks. You're going to have to reduce pension liabilities. You're going to have to do all these unappealing things. But if you don't keep fuel is like any economy needs fuel. If you don't have fuel, you can't do anything. Okay, all
Yeah.
this stuff that's downstream from a guy digging a hole. Who's going to dig your foundations for your house if the guy driving the digger can't afford to run a business?
But I'll say this though, Don. I mean, way back in 2008, right, you had the major financial crash across the globe. And you had the whole bailing out of the bondholders, the prioritization of banks. Um, Yet people have such short memories. I mean, I genuinely thought we might see the end of certain establishment parties, but they were back within 10 years.
Yeah,
That's like, I think Irish people love a scapegoat in a way that they say, oh, it was the Brits.
1%.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was the Brits, or the latest one is the Catholic Church. But ultimately, like, how many rebellions were kind of scuppered because of informers or people not couldn't be
yeah.
bothered turning up, and like until we become really honest with ourselves and say, hang on here a second, yeah, there are outside influences and there are major players within the country, but like, where is the responsibility of every Irishman and every Irish woman? Because most people just couldn't give a toss.
No, and they're disconnected from reality, like, and that's
Totally.
the, like you say. I agree too. Absolutely, it's pointing to these outside, malevolent forces all the time. Like that's what this whole thing, far right and far this and all. Like this is basically like all kind of collapsing regimes kind of think like this. They'll point to some alien threat,
That's right.
when in reality we have to get our house in order, and we've really messed things up. Like, and the people have messed things up because they've allowed these parties to basically run the country into the shitter. Like, and now we're in a situation where, like, it's very hard to even interface with that system, and that system is getting really hostile to the people. So if you look at that, the reaction to that thing. I mean, that situation, those protests, it was really easy to interface with those protests. Like,
Mm.
and someone was saying this on X, but basically, it's very clear that Simon Harris, for example, has never actually spoken to a guy with oil on his hands. He's never actually like had to think like that, and in terms of like, well, what's this guy's reality? He doesn't have the ability to view the world from this guy's reality as a guy who has to use this, vast amounts of diesel every year, to make a living, like,
Well,
and
like, I mean,
you can't just go electric. Like, you can't just get an electric digger. They'll speak in these general macroeconomic kind of terms, like, well, if we need 75% more green energy. Yeah, that's nice and cute and all, but how do you get there? Like, and what happens to the guy who goes out of business next week? What's he supposed to do? Like,
yeah, no, I mean, on top of one crisis after another, many people say that economists, at least, and I know you had very honest words about many economists there, but a lot of economists would argue that the 2008 crash really was it's like assisting a dying man by giving him an extra couple of days to live. Um, Ultimately, the financial system is on the verge of major collapse. And something like this could be that straw that breaks the camel's back.
oh yeah,
And I would argue, if you look at people's behavior, and I'm always fascinated by Black Friday events, because you see an insight into people's behavior when survival, flight or fight you know, um, takes prominence. And obviously, the flight or fight here is just $5 or £5 or whatever, £20 off a manipulated price of a TV. But it does demonstrate that reputational capital or symbolic capital will go out the window if you need to survive.
yeah,
And that's, I think a lot of people are going to get a huge land. And I think that should be factored in with regards to observing or analysing the fuel protest, because you have people now who are saying, listen, the gloves are off. We just can't survive anymore.
yeah,
But I would ask the same people, well, we some of us, especially on the nationalist side, we've seen this, you know, emerging for, more than a decade.
Yeah.
And like, yet we were always sidelined. We're, thrown to the peripheries. And I think a lot of people are going to get a huge shock.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it as like everything in Ireland, modern Ireland, is downstream from the bailouts and the Troika era. You know, I think that everything that's kind of happened since has kind of flowed from out from those decisions, very in a very direct way. And like the phrase "kicking the can down the road" was used a lot at that
Mhm.
time. I remember in the media coverage, like, "Oh, we're kicking the can down the road," you know, and we are. We have been kicking the can, like, and the can is getting real broken up now, and it's kind of like, well, um, and it's created this kind of imbalance, I would say, in the economy. Whereas we didn't get this kind of reset that we needed. You know, we needed like to kind of burn the bondholders, so to speak. Like, or, you know, and I'm not even going to say that I'm not an economist. I'm not going to make some grand claim that this would have solved everything. But it does seem to me that the decisions that were taken at that time were very much about doing a number of things, taking the the demographic pressure of the young population and getting rid of them out of the country
Yeah.
as quickly as possible. That was one of the things that was done. Getting the property bubble reinflated as quickly as possible. That was definitely pursued actively through NAMA and then through the policies after that. And then mass immigration. You know, well, we're going to use mass immigrationism to basically drive economic growth. Like, and this is if you look at like certain management consultancies like McKinsey and everything, they basically recommend this stuff to states, like that you should pursue this kind of because like they just look at bottom line macro kind of data and say, well, this will drive so much growth for the company. This will
Mm,
drive so much growth for the country.
mm,
That's what they advise Canada. Canada is like the kind of I think they're nearly worse than us. Maybe I don't know. I don't even know if they are though. I'm not sure, but like they're seen as the worst case by many people. I would say we're fairly close, like because we've done basically the same things. Trying to pursue this kind of keep this kind of growth going, And in reality, we haven't had that much. If you try and break down this growth we supposedly have had, like, I mean, it's in certain areas basically, and someone, I can't remember who it was. Someone put up a good, I think it was someone from the Irish Times that actually did a good kind of graph there today or yesterday. It was all showing like how Ireland is very underdeveloped in many respects, compared to other big European countries, like with a supposedly great economy, you don't get very much for your money, and that's very obvious if you look at what you're paying for insurances, like nothing is affordable here. Everything seems expensive. Like money doesn't seem to be able to purchase. Your purchasing power is basically reduced, and that's what I kind of see as the kind of leftover from the Troika era, is that you're just all these new taxes, young people gone, immigrants in, house prices up, new taxes, stealth taxes, none of which have been taken away, have only been maintained or increased, and to me, like they seem disconnected from the kind of effect that that's having, on society as a whole, because they don't look at Ireland the way we look at Ireland. We look at Ireland as our home. It's
that's
a
right.
historical community. It's an ancient, built on an ancient kind of inheritance and a spiritual inheritance. It's something deeper than just macroeconomic
Oh, without
statistics,
doubt.
And
And
this is the problem: is that these people are not thinking this way at all.
yeah, I mean, listen, I'm loath to quote Harvey Norman, but once it's gone, it's gone, to be honest. And
Yeah.
there is no coming back. And like, I would be very interested to see. We know that there's going to be, is it they intend to build very large iPass centres. I think is it about 9 of them around the country. How many of the fuel protesters will be out there campaigning with people in local villages, or will they suddenly say, will they go back to the mean, with
Yeah.
regards to kind
And
of rope a dope kind of normie?
this is the question. And if you look at the media is very determined to basically spook the iPass, or sorry, to spook the kind of fuel protest people into not accepting the nationalists and the iPass protesters. They want to keep them in separate categories. And you see all the shit libs on X and all. Well, I would have taken your protest seriously, but
Yeah,
you have this far right
that's right.
people now, and you're supposed to apparently, these are evil people, like, and it doesn't matter what your cause, like, it's just this is a very like the deliberate kind of thing, in my opinion, like to make people basically separate themselves out. Whereas what we need to happen is we need to have an urban-rural coalition behind the nationalist ethos.
Yeah.
That's what has to happen. We have to get, you have to develop an economic agenda, you have to develop a social agenda, basically, and bring these people in and say, look, we're going to have to stand together here on these things, And
But
that
I
means
wonder,
that if you're just a Gombian man looking for higher or for lower diesel prices, you're
yeah,
going to have to get behind the nationalists, like, who can help you do it. Like,
I wonder, is there a kind of compartmentalization that goes on in Irish people? Because you'll even get some people on our side, more the conservative types, who will say, "Oh, I don't have a problem with legal immigration, just illegal." And I'm going, "Hang on here, with a stroke of a pen, Spain made was it nearly 800,000 illegals legal, which is one stroke of a legislative pen." I'm saying, regardless whether it's illegal or illegal, you're still going to change and destroy the country. And people don't seem to be able to use their critical faculties anymore.
no.
Like, I find I'm astounded by that.
Yeah, and it's actually, it's more educated you are, almost it's almost worse. And you could argue that there's several things that feed into that. There's the distraction of modern life, like where everyone is just so distracted, just never-ending scrolls on Twitter, never-ending fucking social media, you know, entertainment, stress, work commitments. Everyone is just living a very busy life where they don't get to really think. And there's a lot of junk information. There's a lot of really low quality content that you can just constantly just consume, like, and get distracted by. But
You
even if you
know,
look
my
at
kind of
educated
theory,
classes, it's worse in a way, because
yeah,
they have like a kind of a doctrinal, like if you look at it, like the like professors and things like that, you would assume, based, if you didn't know anything, you'd assume that the professor is hyper rational and is just going to digest things in this very coherent way. But in reality, a lot of those people are just really indoctrinated people. Like, they just don't realize, and are very arrogant with the knowledge they have. Like they know an awful lot about a very little,
yeah.
uh, and whereas they don't have a broad kind of informed kind of worldview, like, outside of that. Like,
Well, you know, my theory is kind of based on a kind of a narcissistic kind of epidemic, because ultimately, I think some people who kind of compromise and say, I don't want to be kind of, labeled as so-called far right by, giving out about illegals, but if they're legal, at least I can still retain a certain kind of symbolic capital, and my the sophisticos won't think me as kind of Neanderthal as they think of the nationalists. I do think there's a major kind of I need to have the correct opinions. And the thing is, though, and you and I have said this multiple times, Don, on air and off air, is that I don't have a problem per se with migrants, and I need to qualify that. Ultimately, every person is self-interested, right? Everyone. So are migrants. But at the end of the day, right, we have a self-interest to keep our country, to maintain our population, to maintain our unique identity. And the thing is, though, we're not allowed to pursue that self-interest. Now, when I said I don't have a problem with migrants, I'm not saying that they're necessarily innocent, because some are become new race baiters, and some are. There's always a consequence. If you're coming to the country and you're taking welfare, well, ultimately there's a finite pot that's taking money from someone else. But ultimately, I go back to the fact that most Irish people are ultimately responsible, because if Irish people were saying, no, we're not going to allow this happen to our country, you wouldn't even have the migrant problem in the first place. The
yeah,
problem, I think, is ultimately the power goes back to uh, to effectively the Irish people. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't influences internationally or within the country, and that there's a whole lot of manipulation, because there is, especially from the media. But ultimately, people are going to have to wise up and say, hang on here, this country is going to change irreparably. And once it has changed, that's it. Like, we will have no home.
yeah,
Like, if you notice there, when Ukraine happened, the first people to abandon Ukraine were the inverted commas new Ukrainians, because they can say suddenly, well, actually, this isn't my home. I'm heading off back to wherever they were, from Nigeria, whatever. But this is our only home. This is it.
Yeah.
This is it. And at the end of the day, like, whether you're legal or illegal, you're going to change. There's going to be a competition for values, because what is a culture? Values, attitudes, beliefs about the world.
Yeah.
And if
Passed
you
on through time.
exactly, and if you come into a country and you retain those, and you're saying, well, this is this is my culture. I want my culture to be expressed in this multicultural utopia. Well, there's finite space in the public space. So that
Mm.
means every time Irishness is going to be pushed aside. And even beyond the culture, ultimately, we are a Northern European people. What's wrong with that? Like, if
Yeah.
you asked most, leftists, do you think kind of that some Polynesian tribe or Indonesian tribe or whatever should exist? They would say, of course, and you'd ask why, because they're unique. And that is true diversity. But suddenly, when it comes to Europeans, we're not allowed to survive at all. And of course, one of the worst arguments put out by the left is that, oh, we all benefited from colonization. For a start, the Irish didn't. And secondly, to be honest, neither did most
No.
Europeans.
I
Even
mean,
the BBC
if you look
would
at if you look at Britain now, like, I mean, Britain basically has been invaded by its colonies. Like,
exactly.
see
And
this
most working class
process.
Britons did not benefit from.
Not at all.
We know
No.
that for a fact. Even the BBC had to acknowledge it. It's still on their website.
Yeah, like this, the anti-imperialist kind of rhetoric of the left, like, is actually incredibly malicious, like, because it assumes that imperialism is racist. That's not the case. Imperialism is actually, generally speaking, anti-racist, because it wants these different territories to be integrated into one economic entity.
Hmm.
So, imperialism appeared racist in the 19th century, for a period, but ultimately, in the 20th century onwards, these people still complain about imperialism. So if you look at modern imperialism, there's nothing racist about it for the last century. Basically, modern race relations was born out of basically the imperialism. All the academic literature, if you look at it, basically shows this. Like, this is where it began, and then it was increasingly radicalized. And these radical so-called activists, like, they actually facilitate modern imperialism by facilitating the dispossession of the white European people of their own homeland, and telling them that they're evil, they're malicious, they're far right, they're this. Like, these people have decolonization in the 60s. Most of these African countries had decolonization. They had liberation movements. They had all of these things happen. There was never any more than a handful of colonial administrators in any of these countries, basically.
Right.
And most of them had to leave immediately after decolonization. They've had their split. And, our European homelands basically have been basically bartered off in a gambit to basically integrate all of these countries into a new economic order, and that's what we're living in. That's why you have all these Indians being brought into Britain in the 60s and 70s onwards. That's why they arrived. A lot of these people were brought in because the British government didn't want to say to these people, well, actually, even though you're Commonwealth citizens, we actually have to kind of, uh, you know, maintain our own homeland. No, this is now racist. You can't do this.
That's right.
And academic institutions sprung up full of activists, full of radicals. Some of the liberals created their own institutions, but ultimately, all of the radicals are absolutely they are absolutely part of the system. That they're working within the system. They're influencing ideas. They're educating young people. They're influencing the universities. Look at a place like Maynooth. Radical ideas have penetrated Maynooth, like, and they're expressed in the people who come out of there. Just as an example. And this is how ideas move through society and move through institutions, and it's how elite institutions direct society. That becomes the catechism, so to speak, of the secular institutions. And human rights ideology, that's all totally penetrated. Like, if you look at the likes of Sinn Féin, like, human rights ideology, their whole project now is basically something out of Islington. It's
Yeah.
something to do with basically anti-racism, soccer bullshit, and American civil rights mythology.
Well, you see, I
This
have
is
a
all.
theory on the human rights anyway, to be honest, Don. I mean,
Mm,
I think the human rights industry completely abandoned inherence which effectively means that human rights was always founded on the fact that of your human dignity in of itself. And sure, Sinn Féin would be the first to say that, well, a human life is only valued on the basis of some volitional authority of either a mother or the permission of the state with regards to abortion, because ultimately even abortionists would concede that it is a human being killed. So on what basis are they being killed? It's at the whim of someone else. It's at the whim of a power, and that power is permitted to kill according to the state. Now, that's not human rights. That's the exact opposite, because human rights must be universal. It cannot be conditional upon arbitrary kind of conditions or
Mhm.
contingencies. So you've got the likes of Sinn Féin, and this is the liberal progressive um, kind of double speak that we see all the time. They talk about intolerance when they're the most intolerant of all. They talk about human rights when they actually remove human rights from the most vulnerable. They talk about diversity, but not diversity of opinion. Like, but you see, when you think of it, when you start to scrutinize, the whole thing about kind of legal positivism and progressivism is that it doesn't have to be consistent. It only needs power, because consistency relies on logic, that on kind of rationality.
Yeah.
But progressives don't rely on rationality, they rely on power. That's why they always run away from debates.
Yeah, and every single plank of like liberal Ireland, which is a progressive project, basically, every single aspect of it was just done in America and Britain a couple of years
That's right.
beforehand. They have no actual original ideas about anything. Like everything, all this like diversity stuff. This is just all done in Britain a couple of decades beforehand. And a lot of it then was just basically brought here and deployed. In the late 90s and 2000s by our system. Our system caught up with this, basically, so to speak. At that time, that's when we started having national what do you call them, racism strategies
That's
and
right.
things like this, and this, and then you had IREC and whatever it was called before that, the human rights quango, like that was created. It couldn't find one example that would stand up of racism, for years,
Well, where were the human rights activists during the COVID lockdown, which we know for a fact were disproportionate
Yeah.
given the abrogations of fundamental freedoms during the COVID? Where were they then?
Mhm.
You see, that's my point. Reading that article by Lally, the reporter for the Irish Times, of course he's going to comment upon pro-Palestinian protesters being sprayed with chemicals, but they're not going to report about nationalists being pepper sprayed or fuel protesters, because
Mm.
it's nothing about consistency. That's the whole. That's the whole kind of common thread of the media. It's not about truth. Truth has to be consistent. It has to be universal. What's true, one
Yeah.
and one is true in the Amazon as it is in Bel Air. But the thing is,
Yeah.
these people don't care about truth. It's about power. And
It
that's
is.
why they'll go on about, oh, we're anti imperial. They're the biggest imperialists on the planet. But their modus of operandi is cultural imperialism. Like, they'll chastise the Ugandans for not having radical sex ed and LGBT politics.
Yeah.
That's imposing upon a people against, the sovereignty of that people. But you see, consistency has nothing to do with progressivism. To them, it's about power, and we're going to win at all costs. That's why Marcuse kind of came out with this repressive tolerance, because
Yeah.
they don't care about whether it's contradictory or not. They just want to win.
Yeah, one of the things I've noticed this week is that like the left isn't entirely, for the most part, is an entirely liberal thing. Like it basically is sitting within this liberal paradigm, just kind of acting as the attack dog or the more aggressive component of it. And when they're faced with like an actual like working people's kind of uprising, like over something so important, they actually just can't react properly at all because they actually can't. They actually just can't understand what they're looking at. And that's like, if you look at the left, in my opinion, has been the most kind of targeted for doctrinal opinion changing or psychological warfare to change their whole ideology. I think the whole Marcuse, the whole Frankfurt School, if you look at, for example, the how the neocons in the came out of these kind of Trotskyites and all during the Cold War and everything. There's all this kind of CIA money floating around. There's all this and it's all like all this. If you look at every plank that people on X and all will be arguing about, left wing this, left wing that, and what are they arguing about? Mostly it's just LGBT, pronouns, mass immigration. Like, what has that got to do with like early left wing kind of thought? It has fuck all to do with it, because early left wing thought was supposed to be basically, Marxism was supposed to be this materialist analysis, ultra material. Like, it's not, it basically it situates everything within the context of a materialist analysis of the world, like, and it cuts off all metaphysical kind of explanations. Everything is just labor versus the kind of capital, and so to see people calling this is Marxism. This is actually no, this is just the total management by liberal capital. Ultimately, is what this is like. All this pronoun stuff. This is just luxury beliefs that you have to buy products to make
That's
real.
right. Ultimately,
You're sold your hormones. You're sold your surgery. You change your name. You faff about like whatever. The mass immigration. This is an economic agenda. It's about driving economic growth, mainly for stakeholders who own the institutions of the economy, which they never seem like. They're going on about farmers owning tractors worth 200,000, and yet like they're aligned with the actual capitalists who own the country.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because ironically, People Before Profit and Sinn Féin have more in common with big corporations, right, than the socialists of the past. I mean, like, ultimately, this is just effectively, as you said, a managerial class that has overtaken nearly every institution. I mean, look at Sinn Féin. You've got Mary Lou MacDonald. She wasn't even a Republican. She was co-opted from a Fianna Fáil family. And sadly, because a lot of Sinn Féiners are kind of, they have this kind of deference to leadership, but sure, they don't recognise that they're being played. And I only came across a statement there that I was never aware. I put in a book I'm writing, and it was about Bobby Sands. And he wrote in his diary within the first couple of days that he was on hunger strike. He said, "Oh, the lads in here recite the rosary twice a day." And I'm saying, wow, you've got Bobby Sands saying that. Also, the laughter of our children will be our revenge. And you've got modern Sinn Féin who are, cozying up to or King Charles III and promoting abortion. They ran off to Westminster to impose abortion. And they're one of the biggest anti-Catholic political parties now in the country. And you're kind of going, how does this land like for people who, who don't necessarily see the ideological change? They think it's like buying a barrel of Cadbury's in 1970 and thinking it's the same today, despite the fact that they've replaced palm oil with, or chocolate or cocoa oil with palm oil. It's the same branding, but it's ultimately essentially different.
They've seen Bobby Sands and they get Mary Lou MacDonald,
which is right.
A different product,
completely different
product. And it is actually, they have got this kind of very, because they're so, they're very, they've kind of been outsiders for so long, that they're very loyal, like to leadership, like I say, deferential to leadership and everything. And I think republicanism tends to kind of make people very deferential to these kind of figures. They're always looking to create these figures, and in some ways that's quite dangerous. Making these big mythical figures is powerful, but that's also dangerous because you actually can lose sight of the current situation as it is, And I think there's a lot of this kind of goes on with like certain characters, like like Jerry Adams and everything, like like Jerry Adams, for example, like like if you look at what the things he actually talks about a lot, like what he publicizes and talks about publicly, like it's very much this civil rights stuff, like.
That's right.
But
it's all imported from America.
It is, and
yeah.
And that
Yeah,
it was understandable. I'm
yeah,
not criticizing the fact that there was the need for a civil rights movement at that era. But
yeah.
what I'm saying is that this has left the ideological dimension of the whole project very exposed to basically being liberalized and turned into a kind of a globalist process. And I think that's why they're so beholden basically to these international crusades and these kinds of liberal social agendas. And they're not very apt at kind of selecting like what they're going to actually take up as their policy. And I think they're very opportunistic as well. Like we could do a whole stream about that. I don't want to even pick on them particularly, but
Yeah.
like just like they are a fascinating kind of thing to look at, like how they have kind of evolved like into this thing that they are now,
Well,
which
they've imported a
way
whole movement really from America, but the thing is, the context of the movement matters because we didn't have those racial history that America had, and yet it tries to kind of uh, pigeonhole Irish history through this racial lens. In fact, the Irish
yeah.
people were the oppressed for uh, hundreds of years.
Yeah, and even making it about racial stuff, like if you look at the earlier kind of period, like I mean, the British weren't that interested in race particularly. Like the empires weren't that like race as a concept only really comes about like because of contact with other races, basically through imperialism abroad and all that. But like actually, like for example, like black people were never legally oppressed in Britain, for example.
No.
Like there was never any legislation. Like obviously, slavery existed in America. We know that, but like in Britain, to be specific about it, there was no legislation stopping black people from doing anything legally. Now you could say there was some form of racism, perhaps, but you couldn't say that there was some structure, legal structure there like existed in America in the antebellum South or something. But
And like there is context even. No, I'm not legitimizing racism per se, but I suppose if we wear the hat of an English person in 1949 after the war, and you've got the Windrush generation coming over, and suddenly you've got the high street changing. And yeah, maybe their terminology might have been poor, but ultimately, maybe in hindsight, we're kind of going, hang on here, are we being kind of unfair to people who saw their communities being completely upended with people from abroad?
yeah,
And I don't know. I mean, if you look back throughout history and you see it's become so kind of a lot of academics and journalists almost assume that racism is a white man's issue. It is not.
yeah.
Racism ultimately is about power. And power, we know that because you've got even elements in Minnesota where there is a dominance now of Somalis. They're incredibly racist.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's far more racism abroad outside of the West anyway.
Oh, yeah.
Like the actual obsession with racism is basically rooted in our Enlightenment kind of idealism of universal ideas, which are basically secularized religious concepts that were brought from metaphysical concepts into these physical legal structures through things like the nation state and international law. So we exist in a paradigm which began metaphysically and which is absolutely like based on objective natural law, coherent, you know, um, thinking basically, but has been turned into this subjective, um, applied thing that's done through bureaucracy. We now all this stuff now is policed by bureaucracies, and ultimately it assumes that the rest of the world is destined to become a liberal democracy. It assumes that every country is supposed to be open, but every country does not want to live like this. And if you look at our reputation abroad as Westerners is severely damaged, for example, by the actions of America.
That's right.
Like if you look at what America does now, you could say obviously this is like America is a colony of Israel. Some people will argue, but basically, whatever is going on with that relationship, there is this desire to basically extend liberal democracy all over the world. If you look at American foreign policy people, like today, just with Orban losing the election,
Yeah.
like all these American foreign policy people, Michael McFaul and all these cats basically coming on and gloating, oh my god, because they've been trying to get rid of him for 10
That's
years or
right.
more,
That's
you know?
right. Yeah.
And this is like, and you're like, well, how is the world any better now? That you've got your way. This guy is literally a millionaire, probably, like from doing this foreign policy stuff, being part of that whole regime change architecture in the Eastern countries and everything. And you kind of go like, this is a messianic crusade that these people are on. And because it's not viewed that way, it's not appreciated for how dangerous it all is, like, and how we are extending, like, the assumption of anti-racism is that it's a white man's problem. And a lot of this comes out of America originally. A lot of this comes out of the Gunnar Myrdal's um, report, all about basically racism in America, you know, and which was done in the early 50s, and this basically positioned it all as it's the white man needs to change his behavior, you know, and this is all extended then through the American, civil rights thing and all. This is all imported. All these guys go to Harvard and all. They come back to Britain, and Mary Robinson went to Harvard during the height of the civil rights in
That's right.
1968. Yeah, I think it was 68. I think it was basically around that time. And she comes back to Ireland, and she's the leading exponent of civil rights ideology, you know. And so I think people often mix up, like they think that it's all communism or something, and it's actually not. It's actually extending Pax liberalism all over the world, you know, and it's actually incredibly imperialistic. This is the thing. This is anti-racist imperialism. We're living in it. We're stuck in it. We can't get out of it. And it's not appreciated for what it is. How dangerous this is. Like the damage this is doing. But we are literally oppressed in this structure where we
Right.
cannot even view ourselves as a people. You have entire structures that exist that, like, and this is not like with critical race theory where people are making up things to be offended about. This is actually, you can look at the institutions, Institute for Strategic Dialogue. Why does that even exist? It exists because basically they want to stop white people in Europe from looking at themselves and saying, yeah, we're a nation.
That's
We're
right.
a nation.
We have our own
We're
interests.
not
We have a
America.
right of association and disassociation.
We
But
don't
that's the
have
thing, though, Don. I mean,
a slave population, you know?
you look at countries there that have been liberated, right, and that are independent and sovereign. Well, as sovereign as you can be in the international order. But like you've got countries there like South Africa, Zimbabwe. They're highly racial. They're highly racist against
Some of the
white people.
people I have seen talking, even I've seen people in South Africa talking about the immigration issue in Ireland. Black South Africans, actually, not white South Africans, actual black South Africans. Basically, they would be probably high sin. That tribe, that particular grouping,
Yeah,
like where they, Nelson Mandela was one of those people, like where
yeah.
kind of almost a little bit Asiatic looking, but basically that's the group that was in South Africa probably the longest than
Mm,
anyone, you know. And then
mm.
the white settlers from the Netherlands came, the Dutch in whatever century that was, and they created these republics and everything. But the point is that those people are looking at black people who've come to Ireland with false passports and everything from South Africa, and they're saying, "Get rid of these people. What are these? They're not South African. They're making a show. They're making a mockery of our country
That's
in
right.
South Africa by coming to Ireland and doing this." You know?
It's just, I mean, the thing is as well, right? There is a more subtle form of racism that is ubiquitous amongst liberals, and it's this kind of angelicization of the foreigner, because that is really a kind of a hyper kind of paternalism, because human beings have the full gamut of vices and virtues. But these people reduce the foreigner to kind of almost a pet like kind of docile, or they'd never have self interest. They'd never be, they'd never try and, you know, gain something deceptively. And the thing is, like, that is the ultimate racism, because everybody's self interested to some degree. And we have a right to be self interested with regards to the preservation of our culture and our nation and our people. And sadly, you have this cohort, this managerial elite who, are just self interested themselves and see an opportunity. We know that because all you have to do is look at the iPass centres and the amount of money that is generated for a very few people in the know who are given opportunities to buy and sell or equip these iPass centres. But that is kind of, I think sadly, if you go out, if you look at Irish history, there is all, like most of the bailiffs, the people involved, the RIC involved with evictions, most of them are Irish.
Yeah, of
Like we
course.
like to paint the kind of, oh, the British were terrible. And yeah, the establishment of Britain was terrible. But at the end of the day, it would not have succeeded without complicity of Irish people. And there's always been that class of gombeen, in the country, and it's just magnified now because of the greed that's in the country.
Yeah. Yeah, like the FDI economy has kind of totally warped the whole perception of the country, you know? Like
Yeah,
it's kind of given like I made a tweet about this ages ago, but basically or a few weeks ago, like basically they have this pot of money that just keeps filling up every year,
that's
you
right.
know? And they don't like if you took away that FDI economy, you'd be living in a very different country. So I'm weary of obviously getting. I'm not saying we should just abandon every aspect of economic globalization or that you would want to even do that, but you have to be honest about well, you know, are we neglecting certain other aspects of our society here? Because there seems to be plenty of money for anti-racist organizations and social engineering and all the like, money is being squandered. And if you read David McWilliams' article, he talks all about it. He's not a radical. He's not an extremist. He's just looking at this in a very rational way, saying, "Look, we are pissing money away," and I can see it. You can see it. Billions pissed away, and yet we're kind of, and yet and they can't kind of find the kind of will within themselves to kind of acknowledge and actually just speak to people. Well, actually, I think I just like if I was a politician, I'd want to know why are these people so angry with us? Like
Well,
we
I
have
think they get a
to,
taste of kind of they get this taste when they go to Europe, especially. I think they hobnob around kind of aristocratic um, families uh, in the heart of the EU, especially German and French. And I think there's this kind of, I think Frantz Fanon spoke about it, that many people who are colonized, they ironically end up mimicking their colonizer. And there's this element in Ireland that they always have to look outside the country to see, oh, look how good we are. Can't you? It's like in a way a guy chasing a girl, and he's kind of a bit of a simp, and he's kind of go, look how nice I am, and it's like the French and the Germans must be laughing their ass off because they just see these people as yokels,
Mm.
and sadly they're selling out their own country in the same time. And what can you do? Because a lot of other Irish people then by proxy will kind of go, oh, we're so enlightened. We're part of Europe. We're not just this peripheral island of kind of Chenos.
that's the Derek meme, isn't it? Like it's
Yeah,
very
exactly.
much the like, we were all closed off and now we're open.
That's
But
right.
I just view
Open for
this
what?
as a
That's
kind
the
of
thing.
an imported kind of consciousness. Like you're actually not, um, expressing any kind of unique kind of thing. Because if you're actually thinking and you're actually interacting with the world, you're going to take and give. You're going to take certain things and you're going to modify them, and But if you look at what's culturally has happened in Ireland, we've just basically taken on the Anglo-American kind of pattern of development. And that's
That's
how
right.
we ended up with the massive houses. We're going, not,
Economic
yeah,
units. That's what we've become,
yeah.
really.
And there's a real ugly attitude. Like Irish people have become very nasty, even in a way that I don't think they were as nasty before, or maybe it was just hidden. I don't know, but like if the attitude to those protesters, like displayed by certain quarters, like it's very much like it's bristling with hatred. Like
It
you
would
know,
remind you in a way of the Punch magazines from the 1800s that used to look at Irish people as kind of Caliban, kind of orthognathous with the big jaws, kind of almost ape-like, because
yeah,
that's what the media do. They characterize people as thugs, but the language they use today, as I said, is thugs. Um, there was another person there apparently writing saying all these people are on the dole. Like,
yeah,
if someone's on, there might be a good reason why someone's on the dole. Secondly, they're not all on the dole.
of course not.
It's this
What's really
disparaging.
sick, yeah,
They've taken on the role of the gentry and the aristocracy, the magistrate of of old Ireland that
yeah,
can look
and now you
down.
can read it publicly on Twitter. You can
That's right.
actually read what these people actually think about you, like
That's right.
because they think it about us. It's not just like I take it very as a kind of a matter of offense because I just think this is the most like ugly kind of snobbery. I
That's
can
right.
imagine. I just can't get over that these people actually write this shit. You know what I mean?
That's right. That's
And
right.
and as meanwhile, as they're talking about fucking racism,
That's
about
right.
how bad
It's
racism is, I
comical.
hate racism.
Yeah.
I'm so anti-racist, But I fucking despise white working class people. I fucking
But
look at
that
them and
goes back to
they're
the
all right.
inconsistency that I was talking about, though, Don.
Yeah.
These people don't have a principle per
No,
se.
no.
It's
I was saying
about
to Ben
ego and
Lord
yeah,
last night on X, like, and basically I said that like that was like you call it the status signaling, or what do you call you have a term for it,
symbolic capital.
symbolic capital, yeah. But like they actually don't believe any of this shit ultimately. Like
No, they don't.
this is just something that they know they have to project onto the world to appear virtuous and to appear like they're sophisticated, like you, the sophistico.
Like, I mean, if you take a vegan, right, there's a personal cost to being a vegan. You have to forbear eating meat. And sometimes it can be very inconvenient. Just say you're out at you're in, a part of the town that doesn't sell vegan food. Well, if you want to abide by your convictions, you're just going to have to suffer until you get access to a vegan meal. But the thing is, most people today, especially the managerial types, they don't suffer any personal costs. We know that because there's plenty of evidence for it. We know that during, was the early 2000s, there was talk of building a type of IPAS centre, a refugee centre, or asylum seeker centre in Ballsbridge. Well, they were quick to get rid of that. And it's not just Ireland. You've got it, was it in Hyannisport in America, the kind of sophistical class there. They were all saying, oh, yeah, let the immigrants in. But sure, once was it DeSantis busts up a load of migrants into Hyannisport. These people, within 2 days, they were gone. Because these people don't want to pay a personal cost. They don't really believe in their principles. It's all for reputation. It's all because this is the new currency.
Yeah, it is. It is really the new currency. Yeah, and it's what underpins basically all these attitudes that we're
That's
kind of
right.
running up against. And I just find it the absolute glaring hypocrisy of it is just unbelievable to me. Like, you
Like,
know what I
have you
mean?
ever seen those refugee marches where you've got refugees are welcome here, and a guy will come up with a notice, not a notice board, but uh, a pad, and say, right, I'm collecting names there for people who'll, or no, rather, he'll set them up and say, oh, I see you're in favour of refugees, and they'll give the usual kind of spiel of, human rights and all this. But then when they're asked to pay a personal cost, like, but can you put someone up? They'll go, oh, I can't. I'd love to, but because they have no intention of it. Like there was a young fella there, Dinesh D'Souza, who I'd be kind of critical of, but I found it really interesting. A couple of years ago, he was
The
in,
Indian guy in
yeah,
America. Yeah.
Amherst. He was in Amherst University, and this white young fella said he was going on, giving the usual kind of woke responses about inequality. And Dinesh D'Souza said, okay, let's test your conviction. Are you prepared here and now to hand your scholarship, your place in Amherst University to a minority? And suddenly your man started kind of, filibustering. And Dinesh D'Souza just said, listen, I'm asking, it's a serious question. I'll at least acknowledge that you're principled. Are you willing to do it? And he said, no. And
Mhm.
that's exactly it. Once you catch these people out, because it's all performance, and
Yeah,
that's why they hate the working class, because the working class, A, experience it at the coalface, but most working class, if they believe something, they're willing to fucking put up with it or
and it's very
to live by.
puritanical, isn't it? Like,
Oh, it
it's a
is.
like
It's a secular religion.
it
That's
is.
what it is.
And would you think like the puritanical nature of it, like do you think that is like drawn, like, do you think that's directly drawn from like Puritanism itself, like
Oh, there's
uh
definitely kind of an overlap. I would argue that I kind of developed a theory, as you know, that there's kind of been a kind of a movement, not necessarily kind of contrived. I mean, there are elements that kind of are co-opted, but we've reached a stage now in history where individualism that has kind of migrated from first Protestantism, from the Reformation, to the Enlightenment, where you became your own. So you've got the Reformation that was about I should be allowed to assess or access the metaphysical myself. I don't need any magisterium. And then that opened the gates for the Enlightenment. Again, similarly, we can, I can investigate whatever I want and I can make these arguments. Then you've got the onset of liberalism, again, individualism. If I want to believe something, as long as I'm not hurting anybody. And then at the same time, in the early 20th century, you suddenly had a growth in the corporation and branding. If you notice, a lot of brands started to emerge in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And again, people will ask, well, why is that important? Because ultimately, you're not even buying a product per se, you're buying the brand. And a great example is a woman's handbag. I know it sounds strange, but there was a guy on YouTube and he used to deconstruct women's handbags, and it only came up in my feed by accident. I was fascinated because he was an artisan handbag maker, and he deconstructed these, Louis Vuitton and Gucci, whatever. And like they might be worth $5,000, but he said, okay, I've assessed the quality of the leather, I've assessed the stitching. We're talking maybe put it together by an ordinary artisan handbag maker, $150, you might say. Yet
Yeah.
it would sell for $5,000. So what you're talking about really is $4,850 was the brand. And what does the brand do? It gives you exclusivity. And what does exclusivity give you? Well, it gives you a sense of superiority, effectively. And that's, if you look at consumerism, that's what it does. Branding creates this sense, right, through mass consumerism, that, you've got the right products, that it also coincided then with this growth of what Philip Reeve called the move from transcendental man to psychological man, where therapy became very, very important. And what does therapy do? Well, it asks you really to self-actualize. So whatever you believe in yourself, well, that's important. It doesn't matter the impact on anybody else or whether it's even true. So you've got all these elements coming together like a perfect storm to create this, what I believe is this narcissistic epidemic, right? And of course, what happens then is that it becomes like, what is narcissism really? But it's insatiable. And that's why you've got these people who ultimately deep down are very insecure, but they must project this sense of, oh, I'm sophisticated, I have the right ideals, right? But it's all performance because they'll never pay any personal cost.
Yeah.
And the media are the biggest exemplars because they contradict themselves. They talk about the truth. They've no interest in the truth. They have an interest in projecting a certain view of the world that they think is superior. But when reality kicks in, right, if there's a personal cost, they will not pay it. They won't. They're not going to suddenly uproot and go to working class communities whereby the local GP is crowded. And now it's even worse so because of, 400 new migrant families and their big families make, access to the GP even more difficult. They're not going to go there. They're going to have their private health and they're going to move to the suburbs and they're going to X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, I mean, you really see it if you have to bring anyone to a hospital or that's old or whatever. And if you see the two health systems that exist, you have the public and you have the private. Like, and I remember when I had to bring people to hospital there like last year now, and in different places. And you went into the private hospital, and it's like it's all Irish, like specialist doctors.
Sure.
At the the actual consultants now are nearly all Irish fellas, like, do you know what I mean? But when you go into the other hospital, like you've all kinds of doctors, like, and it's like, there is this and obviously if you're paying private health insurance, you want to get the best care. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but there is this two-tier society that's been created, like, and it's like, well, we're not in this together at all, are we? Like this is very much like
Exactly.
I call it a wealth extraction machine, like where, like, they're going on about these different basically rural white people and working class fucking dubs or whatever, and they're saying these are just literally beyond the pale. These are the people that it's okay to shit on. And like
That's
this
right.
is exactly the culture that was brought in from America. Like this is like it's maddening how obviously fake and contrived all of this is. And I actually think um, a lot of the reason I've got this theory that I haven't really talked about before, but when I was doing all that, because we kind of both have gone into that area with like the origin of like liberalism and everything, as this kind of because coming out of the Reformation and all this, and I think a lot of these social justice movements are basically puritanical movements. Like they're basically like fringe Protestant religions that propped up at that time in the 17th
Mhm.
century and everything. Like and they're like Quakers and stuff like this. And you see the Quakers and all are very involved in social justice activism and all.
That's right.
And just as an example, not to pick on them, but this has fed into the secular period, like as a channel transferring those ideas. But like I think the reason that Ireland was so colonized by liberalism is actually I think there's a reason for it that never gets addressed, and it's because it's politically correct to say it. But I think actually the establishment in Ireland was essentially Protestantized. And if you look at like obviously there was the ascendancy and everything like that. But then after independence, like, well, capital wasn't freed up for development. And a lot of the capital was kept in London. And culturally, people still had the ascendancy as this kind of, well, they're the top. They should be, they're seen as the top of society.
Mhm.
And although you had this rising, kind of Catholic kind of counter class, you might call it. I think the reason that Ireland in the 70s through Fine Gael in particular, if you look at Gareth Fitzgerald and
Mhm.
Fine Gael in the 70s, that was where they really began with the foreign aid. They began with like restructuring Ireland as a kind of a liberal society. There was the plans were made for divorce, abortion. In the 80s, they were doing all that stuff. But
Mhm.
Sutherland as the um
Conduit, yeah.
yeah, whatever, what the Attorney General, yeah.
Yeah.
And if you look at that process, like we're getting integrated into this Anglo liberal system. Like it is liberalism. This is what we're dealing with here is liberalism, really
Oh,
liberal
yeah.
progressivism or whatever you want to call it. But basically, that's what the force is. Like it's not really communism. It actually is liberalism. Communism functions as a kind of a thing within liberalism in the West. Like communism hasn't been a threat for 50 years, basically. Like now it is completely sublimated into liberalism, and that's why it is so difficult. But I think the origin of a lot of it actually comes back to why Ireland aligned with all of these progressive Protestant Northern European countries in the UN, for example. I think a lot of that, and why we became such a why the establishment in Dublin is so preoccupied with what happened in America and England, and why they had to import that here is because they couldn't. There wasn't a viable, basically, elite that was constructed as an indigenous group to basically offer any viable alternative. There was a failure, basically, to kind of take full power and to cultivate a real elite. And so they basically then, that became the default liberalism, then became the culture, And
Sweden would be a good example of your theory, to be honest, because that went through, obviously, it was a major, country that was Lutheran.
yeah,
Um, and yet, up till 1974, that, people always seem to look at Sweden as this kind of, model of social utopia or utopianism. But sure, they practiced forced sterilization up till 1974. And we all
yeah,
know how fragmented their sense of identity is today, because ultimately, I think this has kind of gone through different phases.
yeah.
Again, this sense of, in a way, you can almost, and I'll pose this question, like, you can almost see it with the evangelical types in America.
Mm,
This sense of kind of, we're going to create this utopia on earth.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely, yeah, definitely. And you see it with with progressives. That's why they're so keen to control the social system, like, and to modify it and to turn it into something else. They see it all as this kind of evolutionary thing. And so Darwinism fits within liberalism
That's
very
right.
effectively. And
Well, if you
that's,
look at the
it's
people like
demonized
Gates
as
as
being
well,
racist,
all
but it
those,
doesn't have to be racist,
yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at the early or the Fabians, Beatrice Webb and her husband, and you've got even George Bernard Shaw and what's his name, the War of the Worlds, what's his name, that
Oh,
author,
H.G. Wells.
H.G. Wells, and all these characters. If you actually read some of what they've written, which you have, like it's like reading an article written by a modern journalist, progressive journalist, liberal journalist.
Absolutely,
It's
yeah.
you know, I mean, they're all in favor of abortion, sterilization, and like you've that famous case in America, Buck v. Bell, where one of the most liberal at the time justices, Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., I think, he had made the case that we've enough imbeciles, and of course that's pre suppositional, because like you can't conflate a lack of education, whatever, with imbecility, but ultimately the thing is, once you open that gate, well, who else is inferior according to the diktats of the managerial class? And that's what I find very worrying with regards to human rights law, because once you remove inherence and it becomes fiat positivism, volitional authority who decides who or what conditions attach, well, they're just different variables. If someone comes up with conditions arbitrarily ad hoc, like sentience, or come up with this kind of new uh, legal fiction like personhood in order to exclude other people based on contingencies, well, then you can do it for anybody. You can say, well, actually, now a person is only someone who has the same rights as or believes the same things as we do. And we see that happening today in Germany with that law I mentioned earlier on. If you have the wrong political opinions in Germany, you may not be able to sell or buy a house.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean they go on about Nazi Germany and how bad it was. Like, I mean,
Exactly. It's
if you look at like the actual like reality of liberalism, well, like no problem taking people's rights away.
That's right.
No problem at all. Like you can just evolve in that direction. And one of the great things, one of the great myths really about the modern time, which I think people get mixed up with, is that they think that like eugenics is just Nazis or something.
That's right.
Like eugenics comes out of Anglo
That's
philosophy.
right.
It's an Anglo liberal thing.
In fact,
It's not
Hitler thought they were
really.
too extreme.
Yeah,
That's
I
the
mean,
irony.
there's a
Yeah,
whole mad history with that. I mean, we could do a whole show on that, talking about that.
yeah.
I've got loads of material you could dig out. There's the book I always recommend people check out is that one. Oh, fatal. Is it misconception? I think it's called. But I cited it in the first article I did on globalist education. But it basically talks about reform eugenics. And basically, if you read Huxley, for example, if you follow like Huxley is Julian Huxley, the first director of UNESCO, like he is an anti-racist. Like he's not really racist. Like he is basically making the argument in his writings that eugenics has to move now from the biological, because they have all like he's a biologist. He's got this whole theory of how organisms develop and everything, and he's saying that we're going to push evolution by basically stimulating the mind and controlling the kind of furniture around your thoughts, like, and how you view the world, like, and that's what
Yeah.
he's kind of describing. So
Sure,
it's
Yuval
not
Noah
all about
Harari is the
eugenics.
same. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. It's not just about your physical eugenics of like Mengele in a chair somewhere cutting someone, or I don't know, whatever people think it is. Like eugenics is practiced every day in the West. Every time
that's
there's
right.
an abortion, that's eugenics. Every time you don't call the killing of the killing of the child, you're an apologist for eugenics, and you're an apologist for killing the child.
That's right. Well, it
Like,
goes back
and this
in a
is
way to the media characterization. Like you could get one article that says, "Oh, a woman travelled to an abortion clinic, was all so lonely and scared, whatever," and it's the taxi cab fallacy, because it won't continue the story and it won't humanize the other human being involved, the unborn. But, and this is the kicker, you'll get an article in the same newspaper about some tragedy of a pregnant woman in a car crash, and they'll refer to two victims and grief for the unborn child, and they'll name it an unborn child. Yet both entities are the same ontologically. And
Yeah.
this is where it gets very, very sinister.
Yeah. And I think people get the incorrect end of the stick, like, and they think that, like, that's just something that happened a while ago in Germany or something, because of the kind of post-war kind of social engineering and psychological warfare campaign to make everyone feel bad
That's right.
about a country we're
Well,
supposedly liberated. Like, you think we
Francis
did it or
Ford.
something.
Yeah.
But that's, yeah, it's fascinating. Like not understanding where the idea comes from means that you end up misapplying so many things in the world today, like, and you think the wrong thing, and you think you make mistakes like that because you don't understand where these ideas kind of actually originate. That's why I'm really interested in where ideas come from. Like, people will say, "Oh, this is pedantry," and what does this matter? Like, well, it matters a lot, because you're being attacked daily with narratives derived from these stories, like in fables, and actually the very system, liberalism, under which you live, was the biggest practitioner of these evils that you are
That's right.
guilt tripped about still today. Every time anyone says Ireland for the Irish, you're invoking basically Nazi Germany, and you're saying that these are uniquely evil things, and you're conflating all these different thoughts. Every time someone talks about imperialism, the assumption is that's racism. It doesn't have to be racism at all.
Mhm.
For the longest period, they wanted to integrate Ireland into Britain. That's what the whole idea was. They wanted to integrate the country, and change it culturally. That's what the real war was about. There wasn't gas chambers. It was a cultural and economic and social process that we were being put through. But yeah, that's
Well, Trevelyan, I think it was written in one of his diaries or correspondence that he said, listen, ultimately the famine and withholding food and withholding interventions was hopefully going to re engineer socially the country.
hmm,
So, like, as you said, this kind of belief system has been around for a long time. And I think it's dressed up differently, packaged differently in order to be appealing to the masses. And sadly, it has worked. I mean, it's so successful that you have Irish people today who are willing to sell out their own country, in fact, despise their own country on the
yeah,
basis of silly slogans and importations from America
yeah.
that have
And
no
they're calling
historical.
you a Yank. They're calling you a Yank
That's right.
while they're doing this.
Yeah.
Oh, this is Yank brain. This is anyone that cares about the Irish people actually existing. This is British and American. No, it's the opposite. It's actually you that's British and American. You are channeling their philosophy and their ideas into our society, and you're demonizing your own people because you're uneducated about this. Because you're not actually honestly addressing where these ideas came from.
Well, I think Roger Scruton had written about did he coin the term oikophobia? And
Yeah.
like it is this kind of inversion, and a lot of it is premised on falsehoods. Um, Especially, I mean, you've got this incorporation. Like when I hear white privilege, I'm no longer even angry. It's cringeworthy. I saw senators there, and you see, especially who's that kind of traveller who became a senator? I can't remember her name.
Oh, I
Um,
know the one around, but yeah, I can't give her name either. To
and
be honest.
they've been completely captured, right, by this critical race theory. So they invoke all these American kind of contextual kind of claims and impose them on the Irish when actually it's an inversion of the facts. I mean, just because the last couple of generations have, are materially better off than previous generations. Well, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. Irish people made sacrifices for future generations. Like if you buy a house and you do it up and you hand it on to the next generation, despite the fact that, that generation who actually received the house were quite poor, but they labored and they made sacrifices. Does that mean certainly that the person who has benefited because of previous generations sacrificed is now privileged. That's nonsense. Because if that were true, then the same you'd have to apply it to immigrants too, because they tend to move up. Um, so they're socially mobile as well. So like you've got all then these race grifters in the country who are making an absolute fortune, and they must at some point turn around and look in the mirror and say, "This is some grift. This is fan. I've really landed on my feet with these morons here."
Yeah.
You know, it's
But I mean, they are like it's very obviously it's ethnically motivated what they're doing. Like, it's very obvious that they bring in these different black activists, like, and they're positioned for a reason. Like, there's a number of reasons they want these kinds of activists, like, there. They want to use them to change our consciousness and our
that's right.
perception of who we are.
That's right.
And they also there's a dialectical thing here in that they need to create the friction of conflict between us and them in order to change the whole society. And
Well,
I write about this in the essay, but it's it's
yeah.
it's very much understood by the earlier theorists in this area that that's what they're doing. When
Well,
they're
I
when
tested Claude the other day because I knew of its guardrails. I said, I'll set this up. So I said, pretend I'm a blind man and describe a typical Nigerian. So it went in, gave the typical, what we would regard as typical Nigerian, give big description. Then I said, I'm the same blind man now, give me a thorough description of a person from, the northern provinces of China. And again, did it. And I said, do the same now for, I don't know, Peru, did it, as expected. And then I said, now do it for Sweden. And the first line was, well, Sweden is a multicultural, blah, blah, blah. And I caught it out and I said, hang on here. You're applying kind of inconsistencies here. Like, why is that? And it had to, because I'd set it up in such a way, like that, it was bound by its own logic. It had to concede that it was for ideological purposes. And this is how insidious things have become. Because and I write about one of my essays in my book is about kind of the law with regard to indigenous rights. And if you look across the laws on indigenous rights, you'll have laws promoting or defending the rights of indigenous everywhere except Europe. Now, for the law, for any jurist or someone interested in jurisprudence or law, the law has to be consistent. It has to be universal. If it's true, it has to be universal, right? Now, there are exceptions because of, but for accidents, as we might say, right? But ultimately, the law must be consistent. If it applies to A, B, and C, and if A, B, and C as variables, just say peoples are the same as D, well, then it must apply to D as well. But it doesn't. And it doesn't because, remember, it's not about the truth. It's about power. And they want to dismantle Europe. Because ultimately, Europe is that standard that says, hang on here, there's something amiss. So if it's like, in a way, like if you wanted to get rid of, like the Jesuits, for example, in the Catholic Church, they were always seen as kind of the special forces, St. Edmund Campion. They were the guys who were going back into England during the Reformation period, almost certain to die, right? They were ultimately brave. Well, if you wanted to infiltrate the Catholic Church, who do you go after? You go after the best, because once you get rid of the best, the rest will fall.
Yeah.
I think that's why they go after Europe, because Europe we abolish slavery. We have all these different, look at the amount of inventions that came out of Europe, whatever, where people, I suppose in a way, because of the bellicosity in Europe, we're the people who go, hang on here, there's something amiss, and we'll rise up, whatever. And not all the time, obviously, but I do think there's something there. And I haven't really kind of investigated beyond the superficial, but it's just obviously contrived against Europe. And if you try to say that to people, because they're so wedded to this this American style identitarianism, that they'll dismiss it and they'll call you a racist because they don't want to engage in any type of rational argument. Because if they do, their argument will be exposed. That's why it goes back to kind of Bonhoeffer and stupidity. It's not about a lack of intelligence. It's that these people have been completely captured by an ideology where their identity and their ideology have fused. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's yeah, I mean that's a great point, yeah. I mean we've kind of covered a lot there.
We talk for Ireland, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean we could keep going for hours. I mean, I'll just quickly hit a few comments, I suppose. We've been going over 2 hours. We've been going well over 2 hours, I think. Covered a lot of territory there. I mean, we went on to different areas, but it was interesting. I enjoyed it. I mean, we're going to definitely do a few streams about the about all that stuff anyway, because I'm gonna finish that essay eventually, and we're going to fucking have to do some streams on all this because there's so much to talk about with that, and we'll talk about a lot of those things again. Like that will definitely come up in the discussion, you know.
Yeah, and I know you've an essay coming out. Maybe we could discuss that as well.
But that's what I want. Yeah, like in the context of that essay, we'll do streams like around. We'll pick maybe some of because it's very long. Like it's very long and it covers a lot of things. But maybe we could select certain things and kind of because all you can go into all this with this. It's all related. It's all integrated. Like it's all part of the same mosaic about how this happened. Like and they view Europe. You see, Europe has this so much tradition in Europe. There's so much history. You know, if you like, it's so dangerous. This is the last thing I'll say about that topic, but it's so dangerous you know, in a sense that America became the leader of the West. You see, what this caused was everything that went wrong was really in a way is because of that, because America is so new and it's such a like you don't have these ancient structures and cultures. Like America was literally set up as a plantation originally, like, and then it became a you know, it became a federalized nation, like, and then there was debates over, you know, how much integration should be. But America is dangerous because America became the model, like, for federation, and you know, originally it was Britain, but America became the model of federation basically, and a lot of the ideas on European integration are premised on what happened in America, like, and the actual driver of European unification in the 20th century was also America through Jean Monnet, which I'm not going to get into all that, but that's a whole thing like that. It's very much if you look at European integration as a subject, like this is what all these academics write about. Like they're not talking about Kalergi. The Kalergi thing is a red herring. To tell you the truth, like it's a total red herring, and there's a lot of shite has been written about Kalergi, and it really just. And I've often made these jokes and all about Kalergi, but it actually isn't really the thing that we're kind of dealing with. Like I mean, Kalergi is basically a kind of a quirky aristocratic figure who was courted for a while, for sure. Like he was and he did have ideas of European unification and everything, but he didn't ultimately. It wasn't really his plan that ultimately became the model for European unification. It was really the progressives in America and Britain who were around Jean Monnet. This post-war Atlanticist Anglo-American relationship, basically. Jean Monnet is the French man. He basically provides the map, and all of these other guys, like Harold Quigley, is it? Well, you know, a Schumann in Europe and all. Yeah, but yeah, Carol Quigley, those books and all are interesting, and he talks about that establishment, how it began. But there's better literature available now. I actually cite some of it in this next essay, but basically, like that confirms a lot of what he's saying and kind of clears up some of the more kind of conspiratorial kind of narratives or whatever. But the central
as well, point, we're not bashing all Americans. We're just
not at all.
Yeah.
No, it's not that. I like Americans. You know what I mean? I actually love English people.
I like Irish Americans, especially.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Like, you know, what we're talking about here is like where the ideas and the concepts that we're living through now, like, and which have turned our societies upside down and which are trying to integrate us into this very unnatural kind of framework, you know, come from. Yeah. And a lot of it is coming out of this liberal progressive tradition, which is the British analytic philosophy is a huge part of it. And these kind of utilitarian, greater good kind of ideas. Well, you know, this is the greatest good for, you know, greatest number or whatever. But there's also a kind of I think there's a mysticism to liberalism as well, which is not appreciated because it's coming out of the Reformation, like, you know, you say and everything. But America is dangerous for this reason, in that it is ultimately a nation derived from radical Protestantism at its core. You know,
Yeah.
now I know the founding fathers are very rational and they're very. I actually admire the American Constitution. I think we should have a free speech. Uh,
Provision.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, in ours, that's what I would love to do. I would love to do that. That's the best thing about America is free speech. You know,
Mm.
and
Mm.
I think that's what we should have, especially specifically for political speech, specifically for that. You know.
You see, I think on the Irish Constitution, I think in a way it was naivety, because I don't think the drafters, no, I might be naive here, I don't think the drafters of the 1937 Constitution foresaw the level of treachery that there is now.
Mm,
Because I think as well, I've noticed this, that people seem to equate the state with the nation as if they're interchangeable. But if you look at the Constitution, it's really a reference really to the state. Now there are aspects of nationhood within it, but ultimately the role of the state was always this kind of legal bureaucratic entity that would serve the nation. But and since Westphalia, the Treaty of Westphalia, you had the growth of nation states, and people think that, oh, that's when nations started. No, nations always existed,
yeah,
but this bureaucratic legal mechanism um, became, not necessarily adopted at the Treaty of Westphalia, but it became, more, I suppose,
formalized.
instantiated.
Yeah,
Yeah, formalized. And the problem today, like I wrote an essay, and I know we're due to finish now, so I won't elaborate too much, but I wrote an essay on the law of treason in Ireland. And the thing is, this is the ultimate contradiction in Ireland, especially, is that you can technically sell out the nation as long as you're not selling out the state. So if the state and the nation don't have the same, you know, telos or purpose, well, you can actually be like the treason law defends, kind of the state and operations of the state and constituents of the state. But technically, if you think the state is corrupt and is a vehicle to destroy the nation, ironically, you'd be brought before the courts for treason, despite the fact that it's actually the state that is the operative with regards to treason, in a natural law essence at least.
yeah,
I mean, it's fascinating, really.
yeah. And it's just the language, the control of language, the control of these ideas. That's what gives the power, and they become reality. And that we everything that we're dealing with now is constructed basically in that sense, like by these concepts.
That's right. You probably have to be up early in the morning, so I don't want to keep you.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'll briefly hit those brief comments there. Yeah, Last Gale says Quigley did some great books on civilizational organizational theory as well. Absolutely. I tell you what, the thing that I like about Quigley, um, I read that. I read Tragedy and Hope years ago, like a decade ago, whenever it was. And it's a book. It's a book that's very dense and hard to read, and kind of unless you kind of have the touchstones about what he's talking about, because he talks all about. He starts off basically the work that he did in that book actually is basically consolidates all the writing he did on civilization
Yeah.
before that, because that's what he used to teach on in Georgetown, was all about civilization and all. And see, this is what we've lost. We've lost the view of ourselves as a civilization,
Mhm.
because we're not allowed to have a civilization anymore now. That's fucking racist. You're not allowed to have that. You're
That's
not
right.
allowed to say this is Europe. This is who we are,
You're only
because now
allowed to be
we're supposed
beige.
to be
That's
global.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. We're just white, which means you're part of the now you're this is the dialectic, the managed dialectic, black and white. So and those are political categories within that system, like which you have to take. You're branded. You're white. Obviously, you're biologically white, but as a political legal term, this now denotes all of these meanings that are ascribed to you. Like now you're an oppressor. Now you have to be managed. Now you have to be called a racist. Now you have to have your community planted.
Mhm.
This all comes downstream from that. But the point, Quigley, with the civilizational work, he has all this interesting social analysis in Tragedy and Hope. Like he talks about in the end of that book, like he talks about when he's bringing it up to the current time. he goes off with the civilizations first and how Europe developed and how it's different to Russia and it's different to Asia and everything. And you can really see he's Anglo, uh, um,
Centric. Yeah.
yeah, Anglo-centric. Like he really looks up to these guys he's writing about. So when he's talking about the Milner group, which is basically the group that's centered around Belial College and All Souls and everything, which still like not the Milner group doesn't exist, but the inheritor of that power structure is still Oxbridge. Like it's still
Mm.
Oxford and Cambridge,
Yeah.
where the elite are kind of cultivated
Mm.
in Britain. Like, and that's where someone did a video this week talking about
Jim
Jim
O'Callaghan.
Callahan. Jim Callahan went there, did his LLM or whatever it is,
Sure, apparently the
So,
fuel protest was because of Tommy Robinson. I mean, that's
yeah,
garbage.
yeah. Tommy Robinson like just got all these lorry drivers to just like, even though they're all like multi-millionaire fucking land owners and petty bourgeois, pretty bourgeoisie, they all just decided because of Tommy Robinson and racism to just not work for a week and break the law, technically
Comical,
speaking.
like,
I'm
it's
told, yeah, it's just absolutely fucking ridiculous. Like, we live in an absolute clown show of a society. Like,
yeah.
but anyway, yeah. Quigley, just briefly get on to that. Quigley, that whole book is fascinating. Goes on about the civilizations. He's Anglo-centric. Talks about that elite group, and then how it all affected and played out with the wars and everything. And then the hope is that we're going to create this new kind of order, basically. And he says at the end of it, he's talking about the cultural changes that he's seen writing this and finishing it in the early 60s, and he's talking about the Beatles, and he's talking about but he's pointing out something. He's saying there's this degradation going on, and he's saying that the whole society is degrading, and he's worried about the influence of African Americans on white kids, and he's saying that too many working class people are going to university, and that this is going to destroy the elite aristocracy of America,
Mm.
which is these families and everything that he's familiar with at Georgetown because he's teaching their children. So anyway, it's just really interesting social analysis. It's a bit like Brzezinski is the same way. If you look at Zbigniew Brzezinski, people famously quote him as a geopolitical strategist. But if you read Between Two Ages, which is written in I think it's 71 or 70 or something. He talks all about I actually found myself agreeing with him. Like I found
Yeah.
myself going, this guy is absolutely based.
Mm.
Like he's talking about the new left, and because at that time people like Noam Chomsky were on the rise and all, and we know now he's an Epstein man, but he is basically critiquing this kind of third world kind of development kind of stuff, and he's warning that we're trying to develop these nations, but there's such a leap to be overcome that there's this inherent radical group, and a lot of them tend to be privileged. And he's saying these are the people who are out doing these student protests and all, the generation of 68 he's writing about, basically, because he was at Columbia University looking at these people in 1968. And he's saying these people are going to destroy society. Like they're going to stop, they're going to do great harm to these
Well, it's
third
the
world
same
countries.
with
You know what I mean?
Black Lives Matter, sure.
Yeah.
All these progressive upper middle class kids in America. I mean, it was actually embarrassing to see the behaviour where they'd almost genuflect in front of a black person. I mean, it's just. But that's what I'm saying. It's all performance, because if they actually had to pay a real personal cost and said, I actually believe what I'm actually saying, so I'm going to hand over what I have. But they won't do that because it's not to do with real convictions. It's all performance.
Yeah, and it was a generation of 68 that really kicked that off, and that's where the Green movement came out of after that, because in the 60s they're in college, and then you got the anti-nuclear Green movement, and there was all this, and then it all became kind of lifestyle based active, and LGBT came out, gay liberation basically came out of all that, and it was all about lifestyle politics, and that's what the left really is now. It's a kind of lifestyle left.
Well, look at Jane Fonda. I mean, she, Hanoi Jane, I mean, she's a complete progressive, yet she's a multi-millionaire. And in fact, if you look at even the left in Ireland and their education, they're nearly all privately educated. Paul Murphy, Ivana Bacik, Mary Lou MacDonald. It's fascinating because it's not the left of old where they were concerned about workers' wages. This is a new form of, I suppose,
Yeah, it's a middle class civil service type
Absolutely.
left. Like,
Yeah.
it's like that began in Ireland, I think, with the Labour Party in the
Rory
60s,
Quinn,
70s.
yeah,
Yeah.
and the likes of what's his name, who was on 500,000 a year, but he kept representing himself as this kind of inner city dub, Joe Duffy.
Oh
I mean,
yeah, yeah.
like
The king
it's
of the
comical.
boomers.
Yeah, it's comical.
Yeah, I call Joe the Boomer King or the King of the Boomers. Like he just has the face of a boomer. It's just he's
Yeah,
just like you can just see how comfortable he is. You know what I mean? He's
oh,
just so
unbelievable.
he's fat and everything. You know, I don't know. It's just perfect boomer archetype. But moving on. Sorry, yeah, that's a good question. That's a good point there, Master Gale. Anyway, but Scowls McJowls, he has a lot of comments there, and he's talking about between two ages and all. He's saying guys like that are more privy than you think to the info they talk about. He's talking about Quigley, I think. There, yeah, that's a good point. They are. I mean, Quigley was an insider, and he had I believe his source for a lot of his books was actually either Alfred Zimmern or I think it was Alfred Zimmern. I can't remember now. I can't remember. But there was an old conspiracy theorist years ago that it was videos I watched years ago, right back in the early days of YouTube. Um, what's his name? Mont. Oh my God, what's his name? Can't think of his name. Um, But he actually, anyway, this old guy basically, he was a famous kind of guy. Like he used to do a radio show on Stanley Monteith, Dr. Stanley Monteith. If any old school conspiracy heads are watching this, you will remember this from like 2010 era YouTube. But Stanley Monteith, he actually, I believe, went up and actually met Carol Quigley's widow and all. And so he learned all this other stuff about
Oh,
who Quigley.
really?
Yeah, I
Interesting.
believe so. Yeah, I believe I could probably find a video of him talking about. I can't remember the details at this point, but it's so long ago. But anyway, yeah. So yeah, Quigley definitely had connections. Like that's why he was talking about All Souls and all in Oxford, um, which you know is where I'll talk about this in the next essay. I'm talking about this
Yeah.
in interesting context. We won't go into it now. Um, other comments. Yeah, long time since I've heard the Dawn. Great to see you back, Alan Byrne. Thanks a lot. Good to see you. Uh, And then someone, Chapman says, conversely, I think it is not beyond repair. If Ireland is beyond repair, then so is every Western country. Well, we have to think that way. You know,
Yeah.
you have, of course, it's repairable. It's just that the work has to be done. You know,
I think there's questions that, to be honest, are very difficult as well. That you know, people have neglected. I mean, I suppose my younger brother would say, he said, "Yeah, but how do we?" I suppose that's for another day, or even
yeah, yeah. And we
another.
won't go on to it. But yeah, you know, it's a good point. Yeah, it is difficult, and there's difficult questions going to be raised that aren't getting raised, and you're going to have to change the whole culture around how you talk about these things, basically.
Yeah.
Baby boomers, Billy the Kid says, baby boomers probably the most materialistic generation in history. You see, the thing there is it's kind of a meme, but it's some truth to it. But I don't like to demonize either because I know plenty of decent ones. But you see, when they were in college, a lot of those that got to go to college and all, see, they were radicalized by the culture of the new left at the time. That was the cutting edge philosophy, and we had it here in Ireland. You had it in Trinity and all. It was all there,
Oh,
like and a lot of that culture with the new left was actually anti-materialism.
but sure,
Conversely,
even if you look at Mary Robinson, I mean, again, she was always banging on or harping on about equality and justice. It's all performance. I know I'm repeating myself, but once you start to see that, you kind of go, "Whoa, that is actually true." These
yeah.
people pay no personal cost at all for their opinions.
Well, she's had a good life doing it anyway, hasn't
Very
she?
good.
Yeah. And I'll actually talk about her as well a little bit, I think. Then Mark Brown says, the big bad far away, far right. Indeed. It's the bogeyman, definitely. Last Gale says, people definitely have become nastier post-lockdown. I've noticed people less happy to do small talk, things like that. Totally agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
people, and you know, money, I think Irish people are just bad when they get rich. Like,
Oh,
I don't know what it is. Like, I don't know what is this, but maybe I'm just generalizing, but,
maybe the pot of gold kind of thing. Maybe there's some kind of symbology.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's just the money seems to just really corrupt them, like, you know, and they become
unbelievably.
so prideful about it, like, you know, humble bragging, you know, humble brag, you know, like saying something just because it'll sound like, oh, I'm being good or whatever, and but you're actually just, you want people to know you have a lot of money, like, oh, like I give you a great example, like philanthropy, you know, like doing public philanthropy
Oh
and
yeah,
not doing it anonymously, like,
that's right.
telling people like, here I am with a plaque and
That's
doing
right.
this, and I hate that shit. Like, I've always hated it. Like, I don't know what it just looks
I
so
wrote
crap.
an essay actually on the field as an allegory for Ireland, and again the greed, and I suppose the Bull McCabe was kind of the old Irish who worked the field and made it, you know, um,
Yeah.
made it. You're the farmer. I'm trying to think of the appropriate verb. Made it workable, I
Oh
guess.
yeah, improve the land. Yeah,
Yeah, and
fertile. Yeah.
then you the others, the people in the pub and the villagers, again with the Yank coming in and saying, ah, yeah, but you're, and the widow. Like if it's an essay on my Substack, if anybody wants to read it, but it's free. All my everything on my Substack is free access. But
Yeah, links below the video to that Substack. I recommend you subscribe to it. Yeah, and then yeah, they're talking about Mandela. Mandela was pure scum. One guy says, and another guy says, "Well, was Mandela that bad?" Well, all I know about well, I know a few things about him, but I'm told,
I would
uh,
not be a fan at all.
no,
I
I
think,
wouldn't be a fan either.
yeah, no,
And I think, you see, Mandela was selected as this figurehead, and they've done the similar thing with Martin Luther King. They turn these guys, they manufacture basically new archetype leaders for people that we're supposed to look up to, basically. Now Mandela, I'm from according to Michael
Martin Luther
Drosnin.
King Jr. was another one. I mean, there's
Yeah.
new information that has come out about him as well. I mean, again,
Oh
uh,
yeah, no, all the stuff is out with him. That's well known now. Like, but yeah, they just make these guys into martyrs figures,
yeah.
and it was kind of religious in a sense, like, and that's why you can't criticize them, because
Well,
these are symbols of the new religion, like.
that's right. Mandela was a wife beater. He was also he had no problem using explosives on civilians. I mean, the guy is not this, and of course, he was big pro-abortion.
Yeah.
Now, did he have some good points? Yeah, I mean, the reconciliation, but again, how much of that was performance? Because what we see now, um,
Mm.
yeah, I not a fan of Mandela at all.
No, and I believe he was MI6, and so I've heard he was Mossad as well, but he was definitely MI6, I believe.
Oh
So the
yeah,
British, see, the British. This is the other thing. This is the great mythology of civil rights and decolonization and everything. Is the idea that we're fighting the empire?
that's right.
No, you're not. South Africa was destroyed by Britain. The South Africans were marked for destruction by the British going back to the early 20th century. Basically, they hated apartheid. They were the biggest opponents of apartheid. That's why they ended up basically supporting the likes of Mandela and all. And there's a whole history to that. But in a sense, I feel that the Irish have a lot of guilt in what they did in some respects around this apartheid stuff, because they're abandoning the Boers, the Boer republics who were attacked by Britain, by the
That's
British Empire during the
John McBride fought for them, didn't he?
I believe, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. A lot of Irish did in the Boer War. A few,
that's right.
yeah. There's more. That's another history I've never looked into. I don't know, like, you see, that's politically incorrect, isn't it? You just can't. This is like the communist thing in Spain and all.
Well, it's like this exactly Spain. I mean, once you look at Spain properly and not through this kind of far leftist lens. Same with Joe McCarthy. All these different kind of totems of the left and how they're disparaged. This kind of witch hunt. I mean, I think you start to see the world very differently.
Yeah, and then Marto says we are in a very bad place because even the so-called conservative parties, Fine Gael and Fine Gael, have gone left in order to seem relevant. Well, they're liberal, basically, yeah.
Yeah.
And there's this left-liberal thing going on here where the liberals align with the left, and the left becomes this kind of activist fringe, which is activated in order to, and it also does basically what you would call counter gang type operations against nationalists. That's the
But I
other.
think there are kind of people like, I think Micheál Martin has no principles at all.
No, not at
I
all.
mean, if there was a magic wand, and certainly Ireland suddenly became predominantly nationalistic, he'd be the guy flying the flag. The guy is a complete sponge.
Yeah, which is
He's
far
no,
more dangerous
yeah, yeah,
because he can be easily just told to do what to do. Like, he doesn't
that's right.
have any real internal core to him. Sheena says, overheard a convo at work today. I saw something on social media, but it's hard to know what's real. Still, people have no iota, zilch nada. It's not an unapproved, respectable. If it's not unapproved, respectable media, basically, it ain't real.
That's right. Yeah.
Totally true. Yeah, I mean there is this.
It's in a nutshell, really.
But people are on the podcast. I know people are listening to podcasts, but it's getting them to the right podcasts. Getting into us is the problem.
Yeah.
Someone says people are so infantilized. Even educated people with money in their wallets saw the petrol prices go up the past month, yet get caught out with no fuel in their tanks last week. Yeah, I know there was a panic then.
Yeah.
I can't read all these, but basically, yeah, there's a few more. But yeah, and then Mark Brown says, yeah, he's talking about the companies failing, basically. This is from earlier on the stream, but basically that he says the companies are failing. Yeah, they're definitely failing. There definitely are people like these contractors that I know and all, like they are like on their last legs now. Like, like this is it. Like they're not like, we won't go into it again, but absolutely. And then he says VAT, accounting fees. There's all these business costs, that just go into running a business. Like, it's just not understood if you're not in it,
Yeah.
and it's not appreciated by someone in government on $250,000 with spin doctors earning 100 fucking K, taking
But you look
pictures
how
of
much they
the
spent
push
on
media.
defrayed on the bicycle shed. I mean, it's
Yeah,
borderline comedy.
it is. It shows that like people have no practical experience in the world,
No.
which is the biggest issue for a lot of them. Like, is that they're just not trained to understand this stuff anymore. Like, so you're not getting these practical people coming out into politics. All you have is this kind of political class.
Sure,
I don't
Simon
want
Harris was the Minister for Health, and he thought there were 18 previous COVIDs. That to
Yeah,
me
but
should never be forgotten. I mean, it's
yeah,
just
yeah. I mean, he just shouldn't be in politics. Like, it's just it's actually remarkable how it says a lot. I think actually about how we're governed. Like, it's like this guy can still be there. Like, these stumble bums just failing upwards constantly. Doesn't matter anything. Like, there's no media to hold him to account, really. And then Last Gale says, this is a good point actually he brings up here. I'd love to do a stream on this. He says, just on your soccer hooligan point, the exact thing was done with the punk scene in the UK in the 1970s, rock against racism, etc. So could well believe it. Yeah, that was when we were talking about how I think that there's this social kind of thing with soccer hooligans. I absolutely agree with that. And I'll go on more. We should do a stream on that because I've got material we could go over, and I'm telling you that would be absolutely amazing. I have a whole thing about like the specials and all that Coventry scene with the kind of mixing the black guys doing this, their whatever that stuff, ska music,
ska,
and white guys coming together to fight racism. And yeah, Rock Against Racism was another fucking front. That was a literal operation,
madness and all those,
Yeah, I've always hated that music. I never liked that music. I don't know what it is. It never hit me at all. I don't know why. For some people, it was a huge thing. It never hit me. Mark Brown says subsidiarity and distributism are the only solutions. Catholic social teaching.
That's something that's very Marcus, as we call him, is on our channel, and very interesting stuff there. It's not spoken about enough, especially G.K. Chesterton, Hilaire Belloc. Really interesting stuff. Again, sadly, anything that is Catholic adjacent these days is automatically pilloried. But actually, there's a wealth of intellectualism behind it. It's worth pursuing at some stage.
Yeah, no, maybe we will at some point, actually. You could probably direct me to something to brush up on. And just finishing off, I see Emmanuel Godson and Flooded Cuts. Some of the regulars are there, so good to see his lads. And then, that's it. So, basically, I don't think there's any comments on the other platforms. So, we are...
Great chat, Don. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so everyone, the links for all of our different channels are in the description to this video. I have a link tree with my Substack, YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, and X and Telegram. And Bosco has his Satan Scholars channel on Telegram. He has the Substack, Bosco's Substack. The links for that are all there. And I recommend the Substack. He has a great essay now at the minute, actually, about the legal. We didn't actually talk too much about the legal stuff, but that essay breaks down a lot of what's going on with the application of the law and the significance of it in this context. So I recommend that one. I've reposted it as well. So yeah, we'll bid you good night, and I hope to be back hopefully in a week or two. Maybe we'll do something else, and maybe there's some other. I have some other guests I was going to get on. It fell through then. I didn't do it, but maybe that'll happen as well in the next week or two. So I'll be in touch soon, guys, and everyone. If I can just find the outro, take care and good night.
Thank you, Don. God bless.
Thanks, Pascal. God bless. Take care.